I'm the highest civilization in the universe. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 651, Shock. As Li Ming saw, the purple object released by the other party had a transparent lubricating liquid on its surface. Although it was entangled by vines, it did not affect its extension or contraction at all. Wit's figure turned slightly in the air and looked at Li Ming directly, ignoring Redelia. However, before Wit could continue to attack, another cloaked shadow fell and landed between Li Ming and Wit. This person stood straight, and a pair of red eyes looked at Li Ming like two holes. A green arm stretched out from the cloak, grabbed the cloak in front of him, and then tossed it hard, pulling off the cloak on his body. The whole green body immediately appeared in front of everyone. The surface of his body was no different from that of an ordinary pumy, but the pumy were basically silver, while he was green, and his red eyes were completely different from the pumy's black eyes. This person was Godwin. Without turning his head, he said, "This person. We pumy people have accepted it. Do you orcs want to intervene?" Wit behind him was startled when he heard this, turned his body, and looked back at Nicole. Nicole gritted her teeth at the sight, and after taking a look at the situation, she waved to Wit. Wit understood Nicole's intention, and stepped back to Nicole's side. Seeing Wit leave in a weak manner, Godwin turned his head again to look at Nicole's position and said, "I advise you to leave the Star of Base first. General Sims in space has seen everything that happened here. If you don't want to go against our pumy civilization, then get out." Nicole's face was extremely ugly at the moment. Nicole was naturally aware of General Sims's affairs in space, but it was indeed not the time to go to war with the pumy people. The so-called pumy people are actually a second-level civilization world. The reason why it is called a second-level civilization world is that the pumy people can reproduce offspring of the second-level civilization at birth, which has a great relationship with their unique civilization reproduction technology. After other civilizations reach the second-level civilization, they are either blocked by the pumy people or taken under their command. They are truly second-level civilization worlds. It was too early to confront such a powerful civilization. In addition, the sudden closure of the Eye of the Earth meant that the interest point no longer existed. The only thing that existed was Li Ming's doubt. Only Li Ming knew what happened in the Eye of the Earth, but it was not worth starting a war for an unknown answer. After thinking about it, Nicole whispered, "Kinu and I will withdraw to space first. Wit will lie in wait for an opportunity. When necessary, you can take necessary measures." As he spoke, his eyes turned to Wit. Wit already understood the meaning of this, and nodded slightly and replied, "Understood." He looked at the pumy blade in the distance again. Nicole turned around and left, and Kinu and Wit followed closely behind. Seeing the orcs leave, Godwin showed satisfaction, and then his eyes returned to Li Ming. But the blood hunter in the distance frowned slightly, and looked a little ugly. The departure of the orcs meant that it was almost impossible to have a fight between the pumy and the orcs, which meant that the plan would fail completely. Seeing this, the angry eyes of the blood hunter returned to Li Ming. The red eyes of Godwin opposite Li Ming slightly lit up, and the corners of his mouth showed a sinister look, saying, "Level 2 civilization, end the battle immediately." As soon as the voice fell, Godwin suddenly moved and ran straight to Li Ming. Li Ming concentrated on watching the other party with a calm expression. Godwin quickly landed on the top of the dilapidated spaceship where Li Ming was, and then ran towards Li Ming. His speed was generally not very fast, and it was not comparable to that of Wit just now. With his keen eyes, Li Ming only found a little abnormality. This green body of Godwin was different from the silver body of ordinary pumy people. The green body surface was full of energy aura, which was slightly different from the general combat energy. But before Li Ming could understand the abnormality, Godwin had already arrived in front of him. Without a strong energy aura and weapons, he directly grabbed Li Ming with a pair of hands. This ordinary attack made Li Ming more alert. He moved quickly and tried to avoid the opponent's attack as much as possible. However, after dodging for a while, Li Ming did not find any special ability of the opponent. Suddenly, a white light flashed in his right hand, and a light blade flew out of his hand. Facing Godwin's attack with bare hands, he slashed it. With a light sound of puff, Li Ming's slash directly pierced into Godwin's body. Godwin stopped attacking, and his eyes widened slightly. At first, he was surprised, but soon evolved into excitement, and the corners of his mouth also rose to reveal a smile. Li Ming was also surprised that this attack hit. According to Li Ming's expectation, the opponent would be able to easily dodge this attack, but he didn't expect it to hit. Seeing Godwin's hideous smile, Li Ming was not excited at all, even though he hit the opponent. After a few seconds, the lightsaber in Li Ming's hand suddenly disappeared with a whoosh, which was absorbed by Godwin's body. Li Ming frowned, and his face looked even uglier. Godwin leaped back and jumped far away. At the same time, he clapped his hand at the spaceship under his feet and whispered, "Transform into a beast." After this, the spaceship under Li Ming's feet suddenly turned green, followed by his feet and legs, all turned green, until his lower body was completely covered in green. The green part was completely immobile, as if it was suppressed by an object that suppressed energy. At this time, Li Ming frowned and thought of something. The green energy on Godwin's body can be separated from the body and move independently. From the moment Godwin jumped onto the spaceship, every step he took towards Li Ming injected green energy into the spaceship under his feet, and attached his green energy to the entire spaceship, and then he just had to wait for an opportunity. This green energy will not take effect immediately after entering the body. It will take a certain amount of time to work. Li Ming looked at his lower body that could not move, and then looked at Godwin on the opposite side. He still understood the other party's special ability and couldn't help whispering, "So, that's it." The voice was not loud, but Godwin heard it very clearly. He stood up and said, "It's really easy to get it done." At the end, a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Seeing the bound Li Ming, Raphaelia was also shocked, but did not act immediately. Rockburner, who also saw this, shook his body and looked ready to act. Before Rockburner took action, Bloodhunter said, "He is really an extraordinary guy." This made Rockburner, who wanted to join the battle, pause and look back at Bloodhunter. Even Delaney frowned in confusion. Under the effect of Zilei, Bloodhunter's eyes can see through everything. In Bloodhunter's eyes, there are two Li Mings at this moment. One is a clone bound by Godwin, and the other Li Ming is in another building not far away. Duplicates, illusions, summoning vines, elemental realms. This second level civilization, the real strength is no longer something that the second zone can handle. Bloodhunter continued. Rockburner and Delaney only understood what he said, and they did not dare to act rashly. At this moment, Li Ming was in another spaceship not far away. At the same time, Li Ming's flying dragon also allowed Li Ming to see clearly what was happening outside. In the dark cabin, Li Ming said to himself, "Energy attacks have no effect. Only physical attacks can be used, but close-range attacks may be suppressed by the green object. It's really a tricky guy." At this time, Godwin looked up at Lang and said, "Can we call it a day?" Lang did not reply immediately, but just stared at the bound Li Ming, as if thinking about something in his mind. The silver Pumi who had been beside Lang looked at Lang, then looked at Godwin below, and then shouted, "Teacher." At this time, Lang's face suddenly changed, his eyebrows frowned, and he shouted, "Not good." Chapter 652, General Sims arrives. After a loud shout, the bound Li Ming suddenly flashed red light, and then exploded with a boom. The red light shone everywhere, and the fierce flames rushed to the surroundings. The flames were like a fire, engulfing the entire spaceship in just a moment. The huge and dilapidated spaceship also turned into a sea of fire at this moment. In the fierce flames, a figure flew out, like an object suddenly thrown out of the flames. The figure flipped and landed on another spaceship, and squatted down. There were many burn marks on his body. He raised his head, and revealed an angry face. This person was Godwin. Lang in the sky then came to Godwin's side and said, "Are you okay?" Godwin shook his head slightly, then stood up and said, "I'm so happy." Lang didn't care. After seeing that Godwin was not unusual, he said, "You'd better not attack. Cooperate with my attack." Lang. Godwin was about to say something else, but Lang waved his hand to stop him and continued, "This guy should be measured by the strength of the second interval. If you are not careful, you will be killed by him." As Lang said this, his eyes were already looking around, and the black shadow under his feet began to spread. The black shadow was like a black stream. When it encountered a black shadow, it would connect to it, and then continue to expand and spread, looking for Li Ming's position. But at this moment, an object suddenly fell from the sky, with a loud boom, and the object directly hit the spreading black shadow, and immediately gravel flew, and smoke and dust swirled, and the spreading shadow was directly interrupted. Lang's face changed, his brows frowned, and he looked at the place surrounded by smoke and dust. Before the smoke and dust had dispersed, a figure flew up from it, flipped in the air, and landed on the spaceship where Retilia was. It was Hornston. When Retilia saw Hornston, she was startled at first, but soon her expression calmed down, and her wandering eyes began to look for Li Ming's whereabouts. Just as Retilia looked around, a voice suddenly entered her mind. "I'm fine, don't look for me, but your bodyguard is here." Hearing Li Ming's voice, Retilia was relieved, and then Li Ming's voice came again. "Let your bodyguard take you to find a chance to leave. After all, the real opponent has been watching from the side, and that is the most dangerous guy." Retilia's eyes suddenly turned, and looked at the position of Zuhu and others, and then she understood Li Ming's intention. In the sky in the distance, it was Zuhu and the other three. Retilia's sudden look also attracted the attention of Zuhu, and a pair of eyes immediately looked back. When the two looked at each other, Retilia's eyebrows tightened, as if she could sense the powerful aura of the other party from her eyes. At this time, Lang looked at Hornston fiercely. Lang had seen the strength of this 2.6 level civilization, and he was inevitably a little afraid when he saw it again. The student who had been behind Lang said timidly, "Teacher, what should we do now?" Lang relied on his own mental consciousness to stay calm, thinking in his mind, and whispered, "If this guy intervenes, we can't catch him with our strength. In this case, we can only ask General Sims to come out." When they heard about General Sims, Godwin and the student were shocked. Lang looked at Hornston with a serious expression, hesitated for a while, and said, "Let's go, leave here first." As he spoke, Lang got up first, and flew away from here, followed by Godwin and the student. The other people saw the Pumi people's evacuation. Some were surprised, and some were shocked. Among them, Rockbunner was even more shocked and said, "This Pumi people." The Blood Hunter watched the other party leave calmly, and turned his eyes to look at Hornston's position, but his eyes immediately returned to Delaney and said, "Delaney, how is the space of the Star of Key going now?" Delaney did not respond immediately. She turned her right hand and a small robot appeared in her palm. The eyes of the small robot flashed blue light slightly, and two small blue beams immediately shone into Delaney's eyes. At the same time, in the space, under the dark night sky, a spaceship flashed slightly. This spaceship was transparent, as if it was made of water. The operating table inside the spaceship lit up, and the blue light kept flashing. The situation in the outer space of the Star of Key was captured by this spaceship. The next moment, Delaney on the Star of Base immediately raised her head slightly, interrupted the connection with the robot in her hand, looked at the Blood Hunter, and said, "The spaceships of the Pumi people and the orcs are still there." Hearing this news, the Blood Hunter's expression changed, and he snorted and said, "It seems that the time for us to take action has not come yet." At this moment, a guy covered in transparent liquid was looking at this place from a distance. This person was also transparent, but it was translucent, so he could still be detected, and transparent liquid was constantly flowing on his body. Looking at the position of Hornston, he whispered, "That guy hasn't appeared yet," but the Pumi people suddenly left, leaving only the people of the Dark Technology civilization. But, why? Let's tell Nicole about the situation here first. As he said this, his body slowly retracted into the ground. At this moment, Hornston turned his eyes and looked at the position of the Blood Hunter and others. That look seemed to tell the other party, "Leave quickly if you know what's good for you, otherwise you will bear the consequences." Zuhu and Hornston looked at each other, and their brows shrank slightly, but they didn't care. Everything outside was under Li Ming's observation, but at this moment Li Ming couldn't help but frowned and whispered, "What's going on?" "The orcs and Pumi people have left." Li Ming didn't know the reason at the moment, but since Zuhu and others were still there, Li Ming didn't need to show up, and continued to hide in the cabin. Only Zuhu knew Li Ming's position at the moment. For Zuhu, as long as he knew Li Ming's position, he didn't need to care about anything else. A breeze blew, and everything seemed calm and there was nothing unusual, but at this moment, the sky suddenly hummed. Dark clouds were covered with lightning and thunder, and abnormal celestial phenomena had emerged. This also attracted everyone's attention to the sky. The dark clouds began to roll rapidly, and the lightning and thunder jumped more violently. In the flash of lightning, the sky was sometimes bright and sometimes dark. In the rolling dark clouds, a huge silver spaceship landed shallowly. The spaceship was huge, and the edge of the spaceship was blue, as if it was spit out by the dark clouds. The spaceship slowly approached the ground, and stopped in the air 1,000 meters above the ground. At this time, the smooth metal surface at the bottom of the spaceship could be clearly seen, and sometimes there was a bright light flashing, just like a light. After the spaceship stopped, a beam of blue light shone down, and then a figure slowly emerged from the blue light. The person who came down was wearing a strange blue armor, and behind him was a black cloak fluttering in the wind. There were blue stripes on his face. This person was General Sims 2.7 level civilization, the third interval existence. As soon as it appeared, the special energy aura enveloped it. The cold eyes swept slightly below, and the eyes suddenly looked to the other side. There was no one in the direction Sims was looking at, and there was no object, but only a few seconds later, a figure flew over. It was language. Li Ming's flying dragon could see clearly from a distance. After Lang came to Sims, he bowed his head, and kept saying something, and kept looking at Hornston's position while talking. The distance was too far, and the other party was a 2.7 level civilization, belonging to the third interval of the second level civilization. The gap was not a little bit, so Phi Lang did not dare to get too close, and could only observe from a distance, but he could not get the content of the two people's conversation. During the conversation, Sims's eyes occasionally looked at the position of Zuhu and others, and his eyes were full of murderous intent. Zuhu frowned slightly when he saw this, but he did not care much. Instead, he looked like he was thinking about something else. Sims's arrival made the situation more tense. This great general in the third interval had extraordinary strength, which made everyone's original small ideas change subtly. Chapter 653, Orcs Retreat. Sims first locked his eyes on Hornston, then slowly floated forward and said, "Then let's start with you." Hornston's eyes widened, and he looked at the other party. His spirit was immediately hit. With his tense nerves, his attention was completely focused on Sims in the sky. He opened his mouth and whispered, "Miss Redelia, please dodge for a while." This was the first time that Redelia saw Hornston so serious. She looked at the other party with her eyes, then looked at Sims in the sky, and then moved her body, and jumped into the distance. When Li Ming saw this posture, his body surface flashed with blue light, and he also fled into the distance. Although these two guys are in the second interval and the third interval respectively, their strength must not be underestimated. In order not to be caught, Li Ming naturally stayed away. Just as he was escaping underground, Sims's expression changed, and he suddenly flew down, and his body surface instantly became blue, like a blue fireball hitting Hornston. Hornston had a serious expression. He exerted force, and golden light flashed. A semicircular golden shield enveloped his body. He looked up at the sky with his eyes fixed, and clenched his right fist to meet the enemy. Bang! The two fists collided with each other in an instant, one golden and one blue, like two meteors hitting each other. The blue power immediately took the upper hand at the moment of collision, and half of the sky was dyed blue. The golden shield was much smaller in comparison. If the blue aura was like the earth, the golden shield seemed to be only the size of the moon, and the suppression force was immediately reflected. Boom. With a deafening sound, Hornston, who was meeting the enemy, was directly pressed back to the ground, just like two spheres collided, and the big ball directly pressed the small ball back to the ground. With the loud noise, the golden shield could no longer be seen on the ground, and only the blue aura remained. At the same time, the earth was instantly torn apart, and the entire dilapidated spaceship city area was torn into pieces. The spaceship and the rocks of the earth's crust were also instantly shaken up. Li Ming thought he had escaped far away, but he didn't expect such a huge power. The energy in the earth spread out, forcing Li Ming to fly out of the ground and head straight into the sky. At this time, even Redelia had to fly into the sky to avoid it. A circle of blue ripples spreading out from the place where Sim's fist landed as the center. At the same time, the surrounding crust had been torn into pieces and flew into the air. It was as if the crust was lifted into the air. The rocks of the crust, the dilapidated spaceships, and the remaining aliens in the city were all shaken up tens of meters at this moment. The entire city area was not spared, and the blue ripples spread out, but everyone's eyes widened, and those crusts and spaceships that were shaken into the sky turned into huge ice blocks in an instant, like ice sculptures. A large number of ice blocks fell one after another, and the city area immediately turned into ruins and ice blocks. Sims slowly flew up, looked at the ruins in front of him, looked around, then turned to look at the Blood Hunter and others, whispering, "It's your turn." The Blood Hunter was startled, and the two people beside him were also startled. The atmosphere at this time suddenly became solemn. The third interval is the top existence of the second level civilization. The change of energy quality is already the extreme in the second level civilization. Every time a new interval is reached, the quality of energy will change, and the level is only the change of energy volume, which is very different from the change of quality. The increase in volume and quality must be comparable to the lower level. In such an atmosphere, a translucent alien slowly crawled out of the ice ruins, and scars appeared on his body. Blood slowly flowed from the translucent flesh. Wit clenched his teeth and looked painful. Despite this, a pair of eyes still looked up at the sky slightly, and said to himself, "Even the general has been dispatched. I must quickly pass the information to Nicole." At this moment, in the space of the Star of Base, in the cabin of the main ship of the Orcs spaceship fleet, 3 aliens were standing solemnly in front of the operating table. Even General Sims has appeared. Nicole frowned. The huge turtle-like shadow behind Nicole slowly took 2 steps forward, came to the operating table, and said, "Retreat." Nicole. Upon hearing the word retreat, Nicole immediately turned his eyes to look at the shadow, with an unwilling look on his face. The shadow ignored him, slowly turned around, and continued, "With the foundation and status of the Pumi and the Hydra Centauri supercluster, they can annihilate our Orc civilization. But why haven't they taken action yet?" After saying this, Nicole and Keanu turned their eyes away. Aang, who continued, "In the Hydra Centauri supercluster, before our Orc civilization was born, the only civilization that had been challenging the status of the Pumi people was the Jingpo civilization in the Hydra cluster. Those silicon-based life forms are not easy to mess with. Balance the combat power of the supercluster, then recruit the elites of each civilization as their own, and use this to control other civilizations. The Pumi civilization's merit position includes not only the Jingpo people, but also our Orcs. This is the Pumi people's goal." Aang, who turned around when he said this. He glanced at Nicole and Keanu and said, "Don't annihilate us, let us and the Jingpo civilization check and balance each other, and at the same time, restrict the development of us and the Jingpo civilization. Only by being patient and waiting, opportunities will appear. I believe that the top leaders will give us guidance again." Aang, who said heavily. After saying this, Nicole also fell into deep thought. She slowly turned around and looked at the operating table in front of her. After hesitating for a moment, she raised her hand and gently tapped the operating table, whispering, "Wit, keep monitoring. The fleet will retreat strategically. Keep in touch." After saying this, Nicole reluctantly and helplessly put down her right hand, standing there blankly. After a moment of silence, she whispered, "Retreat." After the 2 words came out, Nicole slowly lowered her head. Shadow Coyote looked at Nicole's expression, but just sighed slightly. The entire fleet began to retreat little by little, far away from the Star of Base. In the deep space of the universe, the huge fleet gradually went away. But on the Star of Base, the battle had just begun. After receiving Nicole's message, Wit clenched his fists unwillingly and looked up at the distance, but he could only helplessly retract his body into the ground little by little. On the battlefield, Sims had already aimed his spear at the Blood Hunter, but before he could do anything, the ground under him suddenly shook slightly. Then a pile of ice was pushed aside, and a figure stood out from it. It was Hornston. Sim's eyes turned slightly downward, and he looked at Hornston with surprise. Li Ming, who was far away, also frowned and looked over. The attack just now was indeed extraordinary, but Hornston was not hurt at all, which made Li Ming's eyes widen a little. At the same time, he became interested in Hornston's identity. Hornston raised his head slightly, looked at Sims in the sky, raised his right hand gently, and grabbed the necklace on his neck. The necklace was formed by beads connected in series. Each bead was the size of an egg and had different colors. At this time, Hornston's right hand slowly grasped a red bead and then pulled it hard to pull the bead off the necklace. Holding the red bead, he looked up and said, "The battle in the world below. Let me experience it." As he spoke, he raised his right hand, threw the red bead into his mouth, and swallowed it directly. As soon as the red bead was swallowed, Hornston's body surface burned with its red flames. The red light flashed violently, and the high temperature energy spread out. The red energy continued to release high temperatures, and the ice around it melted quickly and evaporated directly. Under the high temperature, the unsealed old spacecraft around it also melted into molten iron. Although Li Ming was far away, he could feel the heat wave coming. Just the breath of energy had completely melted the area within 100 meters around it. This was the result of the qualitative change of energy. The same fire element, different in quality, completely different in power and results. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 654, Cooperating with Beautiful Women. Sims looked at Hornston again. His face changed slightly. He thought he could kill Hornston with one blow, but he was not hurt at all. The blood hunter in the sky was also slightly surprised to see this scene. That kind of attack could not be taken head on, but Hornston's performance was still surprising. But the blood hunter had other ideas in his mind at this moment. He looked at Sims intently and whispered, "I think we need to change our plan." Delaney and Rockburner immediately looked at the blood hunter. At this moment, the blood hunter looked solemn, his mouth slightly opened, and said, "You have seen Sims's posture just now. His next target is obviously us. Instead of waiting to die, it is better to take the initiative. When he fights with that guy, I will find an opportunity to kill him. You to catch that kid first." At the end, the blood hunter looked directly at Li Ming. Rockburner and Delaney immediately understood the blood hunter's intention, nodded vigorously and replied, "Yes." After the response, the two figures flashed and disappeared on the spot. At this time, Hornston looked at Sims above him angrily, and with a sudden force on his feet, his body shot out like a missile. Sims seemed to have seen through his actions, and leaned forward to meet him. Boom. The dazzling light spread out, and the two bodies collided directly with each other. The powerful energy scattered in the light of closing eyes, making it impossible to look directly. Li Ming covered his eyes with his arms, and retreated to the distance. Just as Li Ming retreated, a black shadow suddenly flashed behind him, and a figure suddenly appeared behind Li Ming. The person who came was Language. "Hand over Zinti." As he said this, a black shadow had already surrounded Li Ming. This shadow was like a thin blade, with a faint light flashing on the surface, and the whole was black, looking extremely sharp. Li Ming did not move, and his eyes turned back. The body that was originally wrapped in the blade shadow suddenly disappeared with a bang. Lang frowned and his eyes widened a little. Instant light slash. At this time, Li Ming had come behind him, and the light blade in his hand had already slashed down. With a muffled sound of bang, the light blade in Li Ming's hand slashed on a black shadow, and the black shadow also turned into a semicircular shield to completely block Lang's back. Li Ming flew away and immediately retreated to a distance. At this time, the black shadow had gradually faded, but Lang's front was exposed. He looked at Li Ming with his eyes, like an adult looking at a child. After all, Larenai has a 2.5 level civilization. Facing a second level civilization, he naturally doesn't take it seriously. However, the attack just now was dodged by Li Ming, and he was hit from behind. It was like being teased by a child, and he felt very uncomfortable. This made Lang have to take it seriously, and he said coldly, as expected, "He is a guy who can survive in the energy vortex. He really has some ability." As he said so, Lang was ready to use his ability again, but before he could do it, two figures suddenly fell from the sky and landed between Li Ming and Language. The people who came were Delaney and Rockburner. The two stood back to back, with Rockburner facing Li Ming and Delaney facing Lang, and their bodies were flashing with energy. Delaney glanced at Rockburner behind her and said, "The Blood Hunter said that, although that guy is only a second level civilization, his strength is already in the second range. When necessary." Before Delaney finished speaking, Rockburner interrupted and said, "Don't worry, I will use the sorry immediately. After all, the current situation is not suitable for enjoying delicious food." Hearing this, Delaney turned her eyes to Lang again and said, "I'm sorry, this person now belongs to our dark technology civilization." As soon as the voice fell, Delaney went straight to language. Seeing Delaney take action, Rockburner looked at Li Ming with contempt and said, "I don't have time to waste now. Let me show you the robot technology of dark technology." As he said this, Rockburner flipped his right hand, and a red crystal block appeared in his hand. The surface of the crystal block constantly exudes energy, and it is extremely strange. The crystal block is not a whole crystal block, but is composed of small blocks, just like the small blocks on the Rubik's Cube, and there are telephones jumping between each small block, as if the arc is connecting these small blocks together. Raise your hand and throw it lightly, and the crystal block flies directly into the air. Bang! A muffled sound is heard, and the crystal blocks are scattered in the sky, forming a red barrier with a length and width of 100 meters in the sky. Each crystal block rotates rapidly in this barrier, causing the red barrier to constantly flash. Li Ming looked up and saw that in addition to the red halo, there were also black stripes in the barrier, as if black ink and red ink were rotating. Staring with his eyes, he couldn't help but narrow his eyes slightly and whispered, "This space energy, but it may take some time to open this complex space. No matter what it is better to destroy it first." Whispering in his mouth, Li Ming's figure suddenly moved and went straight to the sky. Li Ming's move was naturally seen through by Rockburner on the opposite side. Before Li Ming could get close, a laser suddenly shot from the side. Boom. The place where Li Ming was flying just now exploded directly, and the whole area was ablaze. In the flames of the explosion, Li Ming was directly ejected and fell on the ruins on the ground. Want to stop the appearance of the sorry? That's impossible. Rockburnerd's figure slowly floated to the bottom of the red and black barrier, looking down at Li Ming with a pair of eyes, holding a pistol in his hand. Li Ming had seen this pistol before, and it was used by Bernard when he was patrolling the bay. Its power was indeed extraordinary. Li Ming slowly stood up. There was a layer of golden shield on the surface of his body, but the shield was full of cracks at this time, which was caused by the explosion attack just now. Rockburner raised his pistol again. There were still 2 spots of light on the gun. He pointed the gun at Li Ming below. An evil smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. He said coldly, "Be content. The sorry is not used easily for any target. It is enough to show that our dark technology civilization attaches great importance to you." As he said this, he was ready to pull the trigger in his hand, but at this moment, a figure suddenly appeared behind Rockburner. As soon as this figure appeared, he raised his leg and swept it across the air, kicking Rockburner's head. Rockburner also noticed it in time. His body suddenly leaned back, his face facing up, and in a dodging posture, a naked white foot passed by his face. The one who kicked was Raphaelia. However, the white halo on this foot at this moment was a breath of energy. Although the attack failed, Raphaelia smiled slightly. Rockburner turned over on the spot and looked at Raphaelia head on. With a light hum in his mouth, he raised the gun in his right hand again and pointed it directly at Raphaelia. Looking at Raphaelia's face, Rockburner smiled contemptuously and said, "She is still a beauty, but it's a pity. Anyone who stops me will die." As soon as the voice fell, Rockburner's ferocious face suddenly tightened, his brows slightly wrinkled, his teeth clenched tightly, and he whispered, "This taste, and, what's going on?" At this time, Rockburner's eyes were dazzled, his body softened, and he immediately lost control. The arm that raised his hand to hold the gun slowly dropped. His eyes began to close uncontrollably, and his body suddenly softened. In this state, he inhaled the fragrance of Raphaelia's flower body. The spiritual consciousness of desire had fermented in his brain. Rockburner began to enter an infinite illusion, as if he was living in a dream. Li Ming saw this scene, his eyes flashed with coldness, and he whispered, "Good opportunity." He moved and disappeared on the spot. When Li Ming reappeared, he was already behind Rockburner. Facing the unconscious Rockburner, Li Ming's hand flashed with white light, and the light blade slashed down. Rockburner's body split into two and fell to the ground, but at the same time, the red and black barrier in the sky suddenly made a crackling sound, and an object was slowly coming out of it. Chapter 655. Sorry Robot. Lockburner, that idiot. Delaney, who was far away, naturally noticed Lockburner being chopped in half, and couldn't help but whispered angrily. But when she turned her eyes again, and saw the Sori slowly appearing in the sky, she calmed down and whispered, "Fortunately, the Sori has been summoned." Just then, she was distracted, and a black shadow suddenly approached Delaney's body, and at the same time, a black light flashed, like a black jade, and a long black blade had already slashed over. Delaney was shocked, and quickly dodged sideways, but she was still a step too slow. The black shadow blade still hit Delaney. With a light bang, Delaney's body flew out under the slash. When she looked at it, she only saw a crack on the armor on her side, and her body was intact. Her figure stopped in the air, and stared at Lang opposite her. After succeeding in one strike, Lang looked at Delaney indifferently, snorted, and said, "This is the place ruled by the Pumi people." Delaney snorted coldly, turned her right hand, and a black disc appeared in her hand, and replied, "In the future, the universe will be dominated by dark technology civilization." After shouting, she threw the black disc in her right hand out. Seeing Delaney throwing something over, Lang immediately waved his hands, and a black shadow swept over, and turned into a pair of black wings to block in front of him. The black disc just flew over and suddenly exploded with a bang, and a dazzling white light suddenly flashed. At this moment, it seemed as if he was blind. But when the light faded, a giant robot more than 10 meters long had already swung a metal giant sword to cut it head on. Bang! There was another loud noise, and the wings transformed by the black shadow resisted the attack of the robot's giant sword, but under this explosive force, Lang's body fell down under the huge impact. Boom! In the ruins below, ice spikes shot out, debris and waste stones flew, and dust and smoke also floated. The robot did not stop at all, and rushed down with a lean. The battle was going on here. In the sky over Li Ming's side, a huge figure had revealed its lower body from the red and black barrier. Li Ming's face changed when he saw only the lower body. The object that appeared in the barrier was a robot, but it was completely different from the robots Li Ming had seen before. The robot structure was composed of 3 colors, blue, black, and yellow. The blue was the surface of the robot, which was smooth and hard. The black was the metal body under the blue surface of the robot. It looked very hard. I don't know what kind of metal it was. The yellow was the energy body at the connection of the robot's limbs. The energy body was not a physical body, just like the vortex formed by the vortex energy, which was extremely powerful. Looking at such a huge monster slowly falling, Li Ming's brows wrinkled slightly. Redelia also opened her eyes wide, and cold sweat quietly flowed down. The energy aura of the robot was extremely powerful. According to the hierarchy of civilized creatures, the quality of its energy was comparable to that of the third interval, and its volume was immeasurable. Redelia looked at Li Ming with concern. She said nothing, but her expression revealed fear. Li Ming just glanced back at her, and was already thinking of a solution. His eyes turned and looked around, and his brows tightened. Li Ming immediately noticed the circular barrier, and flew over directly. Seeing Li Ming flying high in the sky, Redelia asked in confusion, "What are you doing?" Li Ming ignored her at all, and came to the side of the barrier with a flash. He opened his eyes slightly, and a green light flashed in his eyes. A triangular green pattern appeared, and then his right hand suddenly stretched out. A green shadow flame flew out along Li Ming's palm. When the green shadow flame touched the barrier, it was like a flame touching a flammable object. With a bang, the entire barrier was ignited. In an instant, the entire disc barrier was like a fire disc, constantly burning with blue flames. Li Ming's consciousness had entered it. The barrier in front of him was different from all the barriers that Li Ming had seen before. Although they were all formed by energy, the previous barrier technology tended to be intelligent civilization, while the one in front of him was a technological civilization. These were 2 completely different concepts. Just like the thunder released by the Blood Hunter, it was also the technology of the dark technological civilization, but even Li Ming, who had a strong mental power, could not detect it. The barrier in front of him also completely adopted the technology of the dark technological civilization and was completely systematized. This was the reason why the technological civilization and all the civilizations of Guitar were incompatible. At this moment, Li Ming's consciousness had entered the barrier, just like entering a complex digital maze. He needed to find the path and instructions of the system, destroy the defense of the system, and then make modifications. The sorry robot in front of him was much more complicated than the 3 robots that Li Ming had conquered before. Surrounded by Li Ming's blue flames, the red and black barrier suddenly trembled slightly. The huge robot had exposed its chest at this moment, and it was about to come out completely, but it suddenly paused and stopped. Fortunately, my consciousness is indeed the nemesis of these technologies. Although it is a bit difficult, fortunately there are some clues. Li Ming whispered. Li Ming's consciousness can completely enter the system and control the system, just like Li Ming could control spaceships and aircraft before. The difference is that the robot in front of him is more complex and has the ability to resist. The system inside has developed to the point where it is close to the existence of human consciousness. Li Ming's behavior at this moment is like invading the consciousness of an alien and controlling the other party, just with different structures and methods. Seeing Li Ming standing in front of the barrier motionless, Retilia frowned slightly, revealing a puzzled look, but after noticing that the robot stopped, Retilia understood it and said to herself, is it using powerful mental power to control the barrier? That's right. After all, this guy's mental power can resist the fragrance of my flower body desire. Retilia stared at Li Ming motionlessly. At this moment, the battle in the distance was also going on fiercely. Compared with this side, the battle over there was a completely different level of battle. Hornston's body was all red, while Sims's was completely blue. The battle between the two kept switching to attack and defense as their bodies moved. Their limbs kept colliding, and the shock waves of energy kept spreading around as the two collided. From the perspective of civilization level, Sims naturally had the advantage, but in the battle, Hornston's performance was not inferior at all. It was as if the two were aliens from the same civilization zone. The Blood Hunter, who had been lurking in the distance, had entered a completely invisible state. He held a sniper rifle in both hands, and the scope was already watching the battle between Hornston and Sims in the distance. Looking at it like this, he whispered, "You are an unusual guy. You are in the second zone, but you can fight against the general of the Pumi civilization. I really underestimated you at the beginning." After a long battle, the energy of the two should have been almost consumed. Being able to kill a general of the Pumi civilization, the failure of this plan can be considered compensated. The Blood Hunter kept talking to himself, and the scope of the sniper rifle kept observing the target, ready to shoot at any time. In the fierce battle, Hornston and Sims did not notice this at all. The battle between the two continued. Under the fierce collision, Hornston's expression kept changing. His eyes were fixed on the blue light on Sim's body. He thought to himself, this blue energy is not only cold energy. It seems that using the flame bead is a bit hasty. But it doesn't matter. It's better than breaking the seal of the same level. Compared with Hornston's ease, Sims actually showed some difficulty. With all his strength, his civilization in the third interval could not subdue a second interval existence. More importantly, in the entanglement of the opponent, he could not even gain any advantage in the battle. The battle between the two was surrounded by shockwaves and energy auras generated by the energy collision. At this time, it was very difficult to integrate into such a battle. He must have energy that can match these two people. The Blood Hunter naturally noticed this. The scope kept tracking Sim's figure and whispered, although the artifact will not have deviations in bullets, it will definitely be affected by those shockwaves. It must be used at the best angle to exert the greatest power. Chapter 656, Blood Hunting Attack. The dispersed force of the annihilation bomb is not suitable for dealing with such a powerful existence, so the single target attack, soul-shattering bomb, is the best choice. Whispering this, the index finger of his right hand was already on the trigger. The scope repeatedly locked onto Sims, and in his open mouth, he said 3 words viciously, "Goodbye, General Sims." As soon as the finger pulled the trigger, the muzzle made a muffled bang sound, and a bullet flashed out. The bullet was like a meteor in flight. Only the moment it was shot out of the muzzle was seen, and the next moment, a crisp bang sound was heard. An object directly pierced Sim's chest. At the moment the bullet pierced, the impact of the bullet drove blood and flesh directly out of the other side of the body. This blow directly formed a hole in the chest. It was as if a small bomb exploded inside the chest, causing the chest to explode directly from front to back, with broken flesh flying everywhere, blood splattering, and a hole that could be seen directly with the naked eye. Of course, it was not just the body that was pierced and damaged, the energy soul also shattered like a mirror at this moment. For an alien, ordinary attacks can only damage the body, and it is difficult to cause energy damage, but the attack just now directly connected the body and soul together, which is undoubtedly fatal. This sudden attack startled Hornston. Sims, who was fighting with him, suddenly tilted his figure and fell down, and blood and flesh flew in front of his eyes. The blue light on the other parts of his body also calmed down instantly. Almost at the same time, the blood hunter's sight was immediately aimed at Hornston again. "It's your turn." The blood hunter whispered viciously, and pulled the trigger again. A light bang sound came from the muzzle, followed by a whoosh sound, and the bullet broke through the air, and came to Hornston in a flash. When Sims was knocked down, Hornston noticed something strange, but he didn't know what happened. When the bullet got close, Hornston reacted, turned his head suddenly, and moved with it. Bang! The bullet pierced through the left shoulder of Hornston. It was more like a direct break than a pierce. When the bullet hit the shoulder, the powerful impact forced the flesh and blood of the shoulder to burst directly. The whole shoulder was like Sim's chest, and the flesh and blood disappeared instantly. Without flesh and blood here, the arm also fell directly. Hornston shouted "Ah!" and his body fell to the ground with inertia. Blood Hunter hurriedly continued to operate the sniper rifle, aiming at Hornston who was falling, and whispered with a little anger, "It missed the target. Did he notice it? If the target moves this time." The crosses of the scope continued to face the falling Hornston. After locking a position, the finger suddenly moved and pulled the trigger again. Bang! The bullet flashed out from the wound. Through the proficiency of the sniper rifle and the calculation of the speed and position, even the falling Hornston was completely within the crosses. The bullet flashed in the air and arrived in front of Hornston. The speed was so fast that there was almost no time to dodge. But at this critical moment, a crack suddenly appeared in the void. Hornston fell directly into the crack and disappeared, as if a space crack suddenly opened, and Hornston's figure disappeared from the current space. The bullet passed through the air and flew directly into the distance, just like a shot in the air. Zuhu was shocked and put down the sniper rifle with both hands, looking into the distance with his eyes fixed. The area where Hornston fell was now empty, without any signs, as if there was nothing there originally. What's going on? Why did it suddenly disappear? Zuhu didn't understand, so he set up the sniper rifle again and looked in that direction through the scope, but there was still nothing. At this moment, Hornston's figure flashed and fell into a dark space. The ground of this space was a smooth stone slab, and it was dark all around, without any abnormality. Hornston hugged his broken arm with one hand, looked around with a painful expression, and whispered, "I was really careless this time." In the darkness, an alien in a black cloak and a mask slowly walked on the stone slab. When he came close to Hornston, he smiled slightly and said, "Although you lost an arm, it may not be a bad thing." Upon hearing this, Hornston immediately became angry. He looked up and glared at the other party and shouted, "Sexton, don't say such sarcastic words. It turns out that it's not you who lost the arm." Sexton snorted and said, "Why are you yelling at me? Isn't this all your choice? If you had unlocked the seal, you would have killed those people in seconds. Why bother so much?" Hornston gritted his teeth slightly, slowly sat on the ground, and said, "You know very well what our situation is. Unlocking the seal means exposing ourselves, which is very dangerous." Hearing this, Sexton chuckled twice, leaned over and squatted, and said, "You are very clear about this." Hornston ignored him, closed his eyes, and began to heal his wound. But Sexton's eyes under the mask kept looking at Hornston with a strange look in his eyes, and said, "Although you are injured, this is your best chance to get close to that guy. Don't forget that he has that natural energy. With more natural energy, we can fully reach Laniakia, so I still have to send you back." Sexton continued, Hornston raised his head suddenly and said viciously, "If I go back now, I will die." "No, you won't die. I will take action when necessary." Sexton stood up again while speaking. Hornston also looked up at the other party, but didn't say anything else. At this time, the outside world also underwent a huge change. The huge spaceship in the sky suddenly launched a crazy attack on the ground, and beams of high energy lasers fell like raindrops. The Blood Hunter's position was no longer hidden. Under the radar of the giant spaceship, everything was exposed. The laser began to cover the attack. At the same time, an alien on the operating table inside the spaceship shouted, "Save General Sims first." Faced with the crazy attack of the high energy laser, the Blood Hunter could only fly to avoid it. The armor on the surface of the body flashed slightly, releasing an energy shield to resist the attack of the local laser. However, under such a dense attack, even the energy shield was shaky and could not continue to resist. The Blood Hunter flew directly to the ground with a face full of anger, and the target of the attack was not only the Blood Hunter, but also Li Ming's own Delaney. The black robot summoned by Delaney stopped attacking Lang, and came to Delaney to resist the attack of the laser. This black robot is indeed extraordinary. I don't know what material it is made of. It is extremely hard, and the surface of its body is constantly flashing. After the laser attacks the surface, it is like raindrops falling into the water, just rippling circles of ripples, nothing unusual. Delaney hid on the back of the robot, looked at the sky fiercely, and whispered, "Sure enough, they still use spaceships to attack." As she spoke, her body surface flashed, and the back of the black robot under her suddenly lit up, and a portal appeared. Delaney flashed and disappeared into it, turning and flying away. Lang naturally stopped chasing, turned his eyes, and looked at the location of the spaceship, whispered, "General Sims." As he spoke, he flew away directly. Li Ming was still controlling the Soray. Facing the pouring laser rain, he waved his left hand, and threw out a black metal disc. Bang! The metal disc shone brightly, and a black robot appeared. This black robot was the same as the one summoned by Delaney. It lay sideways to help Li Ming resist the attack of the laser. At this moment, the Soray had been completely retracted into the barrier. Under the wrapping of the green light, the barrier began to shrink rapidly, and gathered together again. This action was also noticed by Delaney, who was flying in the distance. Delaney is inside the robot, which protects her like a meteor. There is also a blue phantom screen inside the robot, just like an operating console. Chapter 657, Destroying the Star of Base. In the blue light, the outside environment was completely taken in. Delaney gritted her teeth and whispered fiercely, "This guy can actually control the Soray." Just as Delaney saw, the Soray's barrier turned into a magic cube again under Li Ming's control, and fell into Li Ming's hands bit by bit. Li Ming smiled, clenched his right hand, and put the magic cube away. After looking at Redelia on the side, he said, "Let's go." While speaking, the two flew to the back of the black robot, and the same operation as Delaney appeared. The back of the black robot flashed, and the portal appeared. Li Ming and Delaney immediately entered it. In addition to the black robot, Li Ming also has red and blue robots, all of which were captured from Burner Cruise Bay. At this moment, this robot is also very useful. The giant spaceship in the sky continued to launch intensive attacks, and at the same time, a blue beam of light was released from the bottom of the spaceship. In the beam of light, Lang held the angry Sims, and flew to the spaceship, and disappeared with the beam of light, after entering the spaceship. At this time, inside the giant spaceship, the temporary commander on the console looked at the scene in front of him with an angry face, and said word by word, "Order the Space Force to destroy the base star." The giant spaceship in space immediately took action. After receiving the order, at the bottom of the giant spaceship, a huge light spot began to appear, which was the accumulation of energy. Super-powered weapons were already in preparation. As for the giant spaceship on the base star, it stopped attacking immediately after rescuing Sims. The spaceship slowly rose to the sky, and was preparing to leave this place. Li Ming, who was in the robot, watched the giant spaceship leave, and couldn't help but look up. The robot's head raised and replaced Li Ming's perspective. The robot's eyes were like radars and high-pixel telescopes. It could see into the space at once. Just looking at it, a light spot immediately came into view. "Which one is?" Li Ming frowned slightly as he looked at the light spot, but after looking carefully, Li Ming's brows also frowned, and he said in surprise, "Not good." Ratilia also looked at Li Ming in surprise, but she didn't know what was going to happen. Li Ming then operated the robot to leave the Star of Base, but before he flew away, a figure suddenly fell from the sky in the void in the distance. It was not seen where this person fell from, but it was clearly seen that this person was cursing while falling. "Sexton, you threw me out at this time. Do you want me to die?" The person who fell was Hornston. When she saw Hornston, Ratilia couldn't help but move. Li Ming naturally noticed Ratilia's performance and then operated the robot to fly directly over. The robot's big hand grabbed Hornston in its hand. Ratilia's slightly nervous mood calmed down. But at this moment, bang! A loud bang was heard, and an object suddenly pierced through the robot's arm. This object was extremely powerful and extremely fast. With this blow, the robot's arm was directly pierced and broken, and the arm holding Hornston fell to the ground. There was no time to save Hornston again, and his eyes turned and looked at the sky in the distance. I saw the same black robot appeared over there, and on the shoulder of the black robot, a figure was holding a sniper rifle and pointing it at this side. Bang! A light sound was heard, and the bullet shot out from the sniper rifle. Just a flash, bang, another loud sound was heard, and the head of the black robot where Li Ming was located directly shattered and exploded. The huge robot lost control and fell backwards to the ground. The blood hunter in the distance wanted to continue attacking, but at this moment, Delaney's voice came to his ears. "Boss, time is running out." Hearing this, the blood hunter looked coldly at the black robot that Li Ming was riding, snorted lightly, and turned to walk to the back of the robot. Delaney flew straight into space in the black robot. As for Li Ming, the robot, which had lost its ability, fell heavily into the ruins with a bang, and could no longer move. A few seconds later, the robot's back made a slight squeak, and a hatch opened, and then Li Ming and Ratilia jumped out. As soon as he appeared, Li Ming looked up at the sky. At this time, he could clearly see a huge bright light spot, and even Ratilia noticed this. His eyes widened slightly, his brows furrowed, and he whispered with fear, "This, could it be a super weapon that can destroy the planet?" Li Ming naturally knew this, and he didn't care too much. He grabbed Radilia's wrist and flew away. Ratilia was grabbed by Li Ming's wrist and dragged away. She didn't resist, but was at a loss. But at this moment, following Li Ming, watching Li Ming pulling her back, she felt full of security. Li Ming stopped after arriving above a huge mechanical arm. Below was the broken arm of the robot, and the robot was holding Hornston, but the seriously injured Hornston could not break free from the robot's palm. The metal of this robot is extremely hard and the material is special. It is difficult to destroy it without a powerful weapon. The strength of Li Ming's light blade is naturally not enough. He came to the ground with a flash and slapped the huge robot arm with his right hand. The blue hot shadow wrapped the entire robot arm like a ball of fire. His eyes were focused and widened a little. The robot arm suddenly moved slightly, and it was under Li Ming's control that the clenched palm loosened. The robot's palm loosened, and Hornston immediately gained freedom. He jumped from the palm and came into the air. Looking at the sky again at this time, the light spots suddenly increased. The giant spaceship in outer space had already condensed the super-powered weapons. An alien in front of the operating table then raised his hand and saw the blue light constantly changing on the operating table, as if a complex command had been issued. After a few seconds, the super-powered beam at the bottom of the spacecraft shot out. On the Star of Base, the beam was like a dazzling celestial body, which made the people on the planet suddenly brighten up and almost blind. But the next moment the beam disappeared directly. The intense light scattered from the ground of the Star of Base, and the entire surface of the planet was immediately covered by strong light. The originally dark planet suddenly became bright at this moment. Then a boom sound was heard, and a circle of shockwaves scattered from the inside of the planet. In the blink of an eye, the entire Star of Base turned into stardust debris in the universe. A planet completely disappeared at this moment. The shockwave generated by the explosion was still spreading everywhere, and the debris of the planet was also floating and flying far away. The whole process was like blasting and demolishing a building. This is also a powerful weapon mastered by the second level civilization world group. The second level civilization has the ability to obtain stellar energy. Simply put, the second level civilization can completely capture all the energy released by a star, just like holding a star with two large bowls and completely absorbing all its energy. Of course, this operation is simple to say, but it is not so easy in fact. But in terms of the ability to obtain stellar energy, the second level civilization world is basically mature, which is incomparable to the first level civilization. The Star of Base completely disappeared. In a spaceship in the distant space, two aliens were looking at the operating table. They were Bloodhunter and Eleni. But the two just looked at it without saying a word, and their spaceship was slowly leaving this place. The Pumi fleet, which had completed the attack, began to evacuate this place little by little at this moment, and gradually disappeared into the dark space. Whether it was in the open, or hidden in the corner, the spaceships at this moment left this area little by little. This airspace gradually returned to calm after the explosion. Everything seemed to have never happened, and the Star of Base seemed to have never existed. But in this calm airspace, in another space, 3 people were regulating their breathing and recuperating. These 3 people were Li Ming, Redelia and Hornston. The place where they were at this moment was exactly in Li Ming's time and space castle. Chapter 658 Limb Regeneration. On the biggest star in the Lapnum galaxy, 3 orcs were facing a huge figure in the distance. The figure was like a fan, with only an outline, and no other places to observe in detail. The 3 people facing it were Nicole, Kinu and Angshen. The 3 of them looked at each other from time to time, and sometimes looked up at the huge figure. Finally, Nicole was the first to speak. Just now, Wit sent the last message. The Pumi people destroyed the Star of G. The huge figure did not move, and Nicole was at a loss. After hesitating for a while, he continued, before the Star of G was destroyed, Wit saw Li Ming was also on the Star of G, so the huge figure suddenly moved slightly and said, I know, you go down. A simple sentence, without any instructions, but this made Nicole and others at a loss. After looking at each other, they could only turn around and leave. At this moment, in the space-time castle, Li Ming, Redelia and Hornston sat opposite each other, and the 3 looked at each other without saying a word. Li Ming looked at Redelia, then at Hornston's wound, and said, the situation outside is still unclear, so we can only stay here for now. As he spoke, Li Ming stood up and came to Hornston, saying, your injury looks very serious. As he spoke, Li Ming suddenly raised his hand and placed it on his wound. The technique was very light, just like stroking, and Hornston was also startled, and his body shrank back slightly, but as soon as Li Ming's hand was placed on it, a warm current immediately came. It seemed that something soft entered the body through the wound, and it was very comfortable. Looking at Li Ming's hand again, it was full of soft green halo, which was the ability of biological civilization. Hornston did not reject it anymore, but relaxed instead. The warm current did not enter Hornston's whole body, but only flowed in the part of the body near the wound. As he stroked it, Li Ming's right hand suddenly moved slightly, and some tiny green silks extended from Li Ming's palm. The green silk was like a line, constantly weaving in the wound, and actually restoring Hornston's physical tissue bit by bit. Muscles, bones, blood vessels, and all the parts of carbon-based life were formed little by little under the green silk, just like a printer using these filaments to weave something. Hornston's eyes widened as soon as his head turned. Even Redelia beside him was stunned. This was not as simple as healing a wound, but limb regeneration, and a new arm was regenerated at a speed visible to the naked eye. Under the incredible expressions of the 2 people, Li Ming, like a magician, used his palm to weave out an arm. The arm was green, completely different from the original one, like a prosthesis. After doing all this, Li Ming suddenly exerted force with his right hand, and saw several vines rushing out from his palm. The vines wrapped around the green arm like a bandage. After the vines wrapped around the arm, they wrapped around Hornston's body again, fixing the arm to the body again. After this operation, Li Ming said, the arm cannot be used for a while. After recuperation for a period of time, when the energy is connected, it should be fine. After doing this, Li Ming turned around and sat back in his seat. Li Ming also wanted to try out the ability of Nito after the fusion. After all, after practicing Cheyenne hexing, Li Ming has never used this ability. Now it is rare to have a patient to try it, which is also a good experimental opportunity. But at this time, Hornston immediately cast a grateful expression to Li Ming. His eyes widened a little and said, "Is this so powerful?" Rathilia also looked at Hornston's arm while looking at Li Ming and said, "You actually have such a powerful healing ability?" Li Ming smiled lightly, looked at Rathilia and said, "Does your Zupping organization still lack medical experts?" Rathilia said with a surprised look, "There is no one as powerful as you." Li Ming snorted lightly and said nothing. But Rathilia was still immersed in that surprised expression and occasionally looked at Hornston's arm. But at this moment, she was suddenly startled, looked at Li Ming again, and asked in confusion, do you know my identity? Do you know the Zupping organization?" Li Ming's eyebrows tightened, and he remembered what he had just said. Those contents were all forcibly obtained from Rathilia's mind by Li Ming before. After hearing the other party's question, he hesitated for a while and replied, "Since we are here, I'd better make some things clear. The box containing the Zin body is indeed with me. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be able to get it. Since we all know each other, I think it's better to do this. If you can open the box, we will take 2 of the 4 Zin bodies inside, and the rest will be yours." Li Ming then said. Li Ming knew very well that this Zupping organization was not ordinary. It did not belong to any force or civilization. It was just a separate hybrid. Those children left behind after the baptism of war, those who forgot their hometown and became homeless, will find their way here again. This is their hometown. This is their home. No one will respect you because of your high level of civilization, nor will they think you are so powerful because of this. Because in the Zupping organization, everyone is equal. There are only 2 kinds of people living here. One kind is those who agree with the world under the control of this organization, and then they are willing to join. This place can be divided into many areas and many bases, and these people are arranged according to different aliens, different environments, and different conditions. Simply put, it is to integrate aliens with the same type of personality and way of survival, and put them in the same world, and let the top leaders of the organization manage them in a unique way. So the people in each base are completely different. Another kind is a training type, which trains some young aliens into people in this world. Let them get used to such an environment, and survive here. In the Zupping organization, you will never find an absolute top leader, but there is absolute equality. Such an organization will make many oppressed aliens full of yearning, but it is definitely not suitable for ambitious aliens to enter. It is also very dangerous to offend such an organization. After all, the strength of such an organization is immeasurable, otherwise it would not easily skim the Zhencheng base, and it is a base in the 2nd level civilization world. Li Ming's request to split the Zinti equally was a reasonable one. After all, Li Ming couldn't open the box. If the other party had any expert who could open it, that would be great. Not only would he not offend the organization, but he could also get 2 Zinti. This was definitely a good choice. When the box with the Zinti was mentioned, Rathilia's expression immediately changed. With a bit of severity, she looked at Hornston and said, "That box can't be opened?" Li Ming nodded slightly, then turned his right hand. A blue light flashed, and a silver metal box appeared on his palm. Then he threw the box to Rathilia. Rathilia took the box and frowned. Rathilia, who had spiritual civilization, carefully sensed the box. Naturally, she also noticed the strangeness of this strange box. A box without any connection points seemed to be a hole. But Li Ming did have 4 Zinti. She looked at Li Ming with her eyes, and then her eyes returned to the box. His eyes moved slightly, and after thinking for a while, he said, "Then you can come with me to our base. I believe there should be someone there who can open the box. As for how to divide the Zin body, we will discuss it when we get to the base." Li Ming's eyes changed slightly when he heard this. He did not reply to the other party immediately, but just looked at Rathilia quietly. However, Li Ming was a little unhappy in his heart and thought to himself, "This woman is really hard to talk to. After all, I saved her, and I have seen her. What do you mean by looking at me like that?" Seeing that Li Ming was staring at her, Rathilia suddenly spoke. After hearing this, Li Ming came back to his senses, smiled slightly, and said, "Okay, let's discuss it at your base." Chapter 659, Kangla Civilization. In space, a capsule spaceship was flying fast. The spaceship was not teleporting, but just flying fast. The position of the spaceship was clearly displayed on the operating table inside the spaceship. At this time, the spaceship was gradually leaving the edge of the Centaurus galaxy cluster and heading straight for the void area. The cosmic void is an area with very few galaxies, just like the open space between cities. Occasionally, there will be clusters of houses, but they are very rare. Just when Li Ming was flying to the base of the Zupping organization, 2 aliens were in a palace on the planet Pulpus, where the Pumi civilization was located. The huge palace was brightly lit, and the walls and decorations were almost silver white. Even weak lights would be reflected very brightly in this environment. Passing through the gate of the palace, there was an empty silver brick floor, and there were irregular round stone pillars around it. Deeper in, there were steps, just like the hall where the emperor held court in the palace, but it was more spacious, more than a kilometer long and wide. At the top of the steps was a seat. This seat was relatively simple, not as complicated as the dragon throne, but it was completely silver, like it was made of metal. An alien was sitting on the chair. The alien's body was also silver. The difference was that the silver on his body was not smooth like the ordinary Pumi people. Instead, it was covered with various strange patterns and there were high armor on his shoulders. It was as if there were 2 human skulls on his shoulders, and there was a long cloak behind him. On the floor tiles below the steps, an alien with a silver body and a long sword on his back bowed his head and did not move. Solace, tell me about your investigation of the Peacock Indian supercluster. The alien on the high seat glanced down indifferently and said. Silas bowed his head below and bowed again, saying, yes, Lord Solomon. The dark lurkers in the 3 superclusters have all been eliminated. There is no abnormal movement or chaos. Everything is under control. Solace continued. Solomon raised his head slightly, looked at Solace below, and said with satisfaction. Solace then continued, regarding the unrest in the Peacock Indian supercluster, the various high-level officials have listed the names and detailed information of the people to be sent to quell the unrest. Please take a look. After saying this, Solace raised his hand, and a blue light flashed on his palm, and the light scattered out. After a crisscrossing in the air, the blue light turned into a screen and appeared in the air. The shadow screen flickered with a faint light, and the names and detailed information of each appeared one after another. After a rough glance, Solomon snorted and said, the Dulan people actually sent out Shianilanwari, Humph. The meritorious position, the noble position, and the Shianian position are just some titles given to those outsiders, so that they can manage the galaxies below for us. How can we use outsiders to quell rebellion? Are the Dulan people crazy? Solomon said with displeasure. Solace nodded and said, that's what I mean. The Dulan people are too trusting of external forces. It's inevitable that there will be trouble in the future. Solomon nodded lightly at first, but soon sighed and said, since the list of personnel has been finalized, it seems that we Pumi people have long jurisdiction. If we talk about this now, I will communicate with the Dulan people after this matter is over. Silas smiled slightly and hesitated for a moment before replying, Lord Solomon, as the only special envoy in the 3 superclusters, don't you have this right? Solomon's expression suddenly darkened, as if he was a little unhappy. Silas seemed to realize that his words were inappropriate and immediately bent down and dared not say more. Solomon then said coldly, it seems that you know a lot about me. Solace was immediately startled. His eyes widened a little, and sweat even flowed from his forehead. HMPH. Solomon had no intention of pursuing the matter further. He turned his eyes, stood up slowly, looked at Solace, and said, for the operation of the Peacock Indian supercluster, you will be in charge of the overall control of our Pumi troops. I originally wanted Sims to carry out the operation, but Sims was seriously injured in this operation, so you will be the commander. Solace lowered his head slightly, his face showed a sinister look, and replied, yes. After this, Solace's figure swayed and disappeared on the spot, but the empty floor immediately flashed with light, and 2 figures reappeared. Solomon looked at the 2, and sat back in his chair, saying, Sammy, Sample, how is the investigation of the Kangla civilization going? Sammy bowed first and replied, among the 3, we have already locked Balderston. He has now infiltrated the rebel alliance. The last place where he lost his target was the Peacock Indian supercluster, which may be directly related to this sudden rebellion. Solomon's brows tightened, and his face was thoughtful. Sammy and Sample looked at each other, not knowing what was going on. After thinking for a moment, Solomon suddenly looked serious and said, "I understand. You go down first." Sammy and Sample were still puzzled, but when they heard Solomon say this, they could only bow their heads and replied, "Yes." At this moment, Li Ming, Redelia and Hornston had already entered the empty area. It was pitch black here, with few light bodies. Compared with galaxy groups or galaxy clusters, the desolation, coldness and darkness here made it difficult for people to adapt. Li Ming had entered here to avoid pursuit before, and he didn't feel anything at that time, but now that he entered with the two people beside him, this strange feeling appeared. Redelia was holding a metal ball and operating it in front of the operating table. Li Ming, who was standing by, could see clearly that what Redelia was holding was an item similar to a space map. While operating, Redelia frowned and looked worried. Space maps are mainly made for regular galaxies. In such a cyclic environment, there are some points that will never change, just like the Earth revolving around the Sun, which will never change. The Milky Way, large galaxies, galaxy groups or galaxy clusters will all revolve around the giant attractor of the supercluster. There will be some small changes, but most of the planets will not change. The void is different. There are very few galaxies here, and there are a large number of wandering planets. There are more uncertain factors, so a more special space map is needed here. Redelia looked worried at the moment, and it was obvious that there were some problems with the space map. Li Ming just watched quietly. Although his expression was calm, he could see something strange, but he didn't say a word. The spaceship was flying continuously under the control of Redelia. In this empty space without identification area, Li Ming could only hand over the spaceship to Redelia. His eyes left the operating table and looked at Hornston. At this time, Hornston was sitting cross-legged on the side. He took off the beads on his neck with his right hand and played with them in his hand like a bracelet. Li Ming naturally noticed the beads. His eyes jumped, and he came to sit down slowly opposite him. Hornston's thumb kept pushing, like a monk who was devoted to doing good, fiddling with the beads. His expression was also peaceful, like a monk who had attained enlightenment. There were 6 beads left, each with a different color and the size of an egg, which did look a bit weird. Seeing Li Ming sitting down opposite, Hornston just looked at Li Ming more and said nothing. Li Ming's face was slightly serious, and he said, "Hornston, can we talk about yourself?" Hornston's eyes opened slightly, but he soon chuckled and said, "Me? What's there to talk about?" Li Ming was still serious. He glanced at Redelia, who was busy at the operating table, and continued, "I also got my knowledge about you from his consciousness. You do not belong to the Zupping organization, nor do you belong to the public universe world, under the jurisdiction of the Zupping organization. So, where are you from?" At this point, Hornston's brows suddenly tightened, and he looked at Li Ming coldly with his slightly raised eyes, but immediately laughed out loud for several times, and said, "In this boundless universe, isn't it very strange who exists and appears? This is all relative. It's just that, if you are too curious." Chapter 660, The Disappeared Larazel Base. Li Ming could see that Hornston was indeed extraordinary, with great strength and human-like appearance, but the origin of his civilization was beyond Li Ming's cognition. This curiosity was not satisfied, and Li Ming was somewhat uneasy about the person next to him. After all, Li Ming was used to seeing through other people's minds directly, and the feeling of being in control of everything. But now facing this second interval, Li Ming's mental power could not passively obtain the information he wanted. If he actively used the ability of the wisdom eye, it would naturally be detected. After some thought, Li Ming suddenly smiled and said, "Since you don't want to say, I won't ask anymore." While speaking, Li Ming stood up and prepared to go to the operating table again. However, as soon as Li Ming stood up, Hornston raised his eyes and said, "You want to know about me, of course, but I'm also very curious about your things." Hearing this, Li Ming paused, and after saying, "Oh," he slowly sat down again. Hornston stared at Li Ming and thought to himself, according to Sexton, this guy has natural energy. Now that we've come to this point, it's an opportunity. Li Ming looked back at him and said, "Then we can have a good communication." Hornston was calm and said nothing, just looking at Li Ming quietly. Li Ming also looked at him with a thoughtful look. After hesitating for a while, Li Ming suddenly said, "In this case, I have a way. We can each open our own consciousness and look at each other. Isn't it good?" Hornston's eyebrows tightened, and after hesitating for a while, he nodded slightly. Compared with verbal communication, communication in consciousness is simpler, more direct, and more real. But Hornston didn't know that Li Ming has a spiritual civilization and has the ability of wisdom. If he wants to get information from Li Ming, it depends on what information Li Ming gives. The two sat opposite each other without moving. Li Ming's body was shining with green light, which was extremely powerful, while Hornston was shining with golden light. However, the golden light was just ordinary consciousness energy, which was naturally incomparable to Li Ming's. With the faint light flashing, the two had already begun to check the information in their respective brains. At this moment, Retilia was still busy in front of the operating table. Looking at the intricate blue light on the operating table, she whispered, "The astronautical map in this spacecraft cannot be perfectly matched. It seems that it will take some time to return to the Larazel base, but it is still good to be able to go back." As she spoke, Retilia ignored the two people behind her and continued to operate. At this time, Li Ming's eyebrows were furrowed, his face showed an abnormal expression, and the information about Hornston had already emerged in his mind. Hornston came from a higher level of civilization world, the third level civilization. Li Ming, who was only a second level civilization, could not understand that world. Li Ming could not even understand more information about the third level civilization, but now he could still understand some simple information. Hornston came from Laniakius, Kangla civilization, an ancient civilization, but a catastrophe baptized this civilization system. Simply put, the third level civilization system, where Hornston is located, is known as the highest civilization, and is the highest existence in charge of a second level supercluster. The Virgo supercluster, the Hydra Centaur supercluster and the Peacock Indian supercluster that Li Ming experienced are all first level superclusters, all of which belong to the second level supercluster, the Laniakia supercluster. The order of the three first level superclusters is also completely led by this second level supercluster, so here, they are the highest civilization. If their position is shaken, it is equivalent to taking over the leadership of the order here, then everything may change because of this. As for what kind of catastrophe, Li Ming cannot detect, but there is one thing that Li Ming is clear about, that is, a series of changes occurred during this catastrophe. It's like one race invaded another race, and the invaded was defeated. Some surrendered, and some fled. The survival of Kangla civilization is facing a crisis. Among them, three important figures must be found in the catastrophe, namely Hornston, Sexton, and Baldiston. They were forced to leave their hometown, but they also became the most important targets in the eyes of the invaders. In Hornston's consciousness, most of the content is occupied by beauties. It is not easy to find useful information from a pile of beauties. After all, Li Ming is also a man. When browsing the information, he will inevitably stop at some other content. It's like falling into a world of sim image patterns. It is really not easy to find useful information in a pile of beautiful women's movies and images. The difficulty is not the quantity, but it is easy to distract the seeker. After a while, the green light on Li Ming's body slowly faded, and the golden light on Hornston's body also gradually faded. However, the faces of both of them were not very good, and they glared at each other. "Damn, it's full of men and women's feet, and this guy," Li Ming said viciously. It was those fancy contents that made Li Ming fall into it and affected Li Ming's search for useful information for himself. Hornston was also displeased, thinking, "I can't find the source of natural energy at all. Did this guy hide it deliberately?" As the two of them were glaring at her angrily, Retilia suddenly stood up in surprise and said, "Oh no." Li Ming and Hornston also stood up and came to the operating table to look at it intently. At this moment, the spacecraft was in an airspace, which was the same as other airspaces in the universe. There was a vacuum, meteorites, planets, and darkness. There was nothing strange, and nothing else could be seen. Li Ming couldn't understand it, frowned, and turned his eyes to Retilia. Retilia stared at the operating table blankly. Her absent-minded eyes revealed a bit of strangeness, and said, "La Russell base is gone." After saying this, Li Ming looked at the operating table again, and his eyes widened slightly. There was a dark area in front of the spaceship, and nothing was visible. Li Ming, who could not see anything unusual, whispered, "The void areas in the universe are complicated, and it is inevitable that there are many similarities. Will it be?" "No," Retilia said with a firm look on her face. "The void space map is different from the galaxy space map. The accuracy of the position is higher than that of the galaxy space map. This is a unique position measurement technology, so there will be no mistakes." When Li Ming heard this, his eyes turned back and forth, and Rethilia's face looked a little ugly at this moment, as if something bad had happened. Hornston and Li Ming were not quite sure about the reason, so they did not say much. But after thinking for a moment, Rethilia raised her hand and clicked on the operating table, relocking another target. The spaceship received the order and suddenly accelerated to leave this airspace, like a beam of light, breaking through the air. Retilia slowly closed her eyes, as if she was still thinking about something. Her pretty face was tense at the moment. After a while, she slowly opened her eyes and said, "Now we can only go to Lasseru to see what's going on." Although Retilia didn't say it clearly, Li Ming and Hornston could tell from Retilia's expression that something bad must have happened. As for what happened, the two had no idea. Just watching the spacecraft shuttle through the empty airspace, and sometimes using the teleportation ability, Li Ming couldn't find any clues in this unfamiliar area. It was like a maze. Even Retilia's operation showed some confusion. Li Ming watched motionlessly, while Hornston had sat down again, with his eyes closed to rest. After half a day, a wandering planet appeared in front of them, and this was also the target that Retilia had locked on before, Lasseru. Some information about this planet was also displayed on the console. Lasseru is a planet born in the environment of the public universe. Its essence belongs to the Zupping organization, but the Zupping organization has no jurisdiction over it. It is just like many public universes. The public universe is like a kaleidoscope, and it is also like the countries on the Earth. It is like many civilizations in a super galaxy cluster. Each has its own way of survival and living environment, but they are inseparable from the Zupping organization. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 661 Alchemist. The advantage of the galaxy world is that it is rich in energy resources and suitable for living and development, but the empty public universe world lacks energy resources, but it is freer here, and no one will restrict you from advancing to a higher civilization. The pros and cons of both are very obvious. Places with advanced conditions will be suppressed and prohibited from advancing, while places without advanced conditions can gain freedom. Lasseru Star is just an ordinary small world in the public universe world, a mysterious place. Under the operation of Retilia, the spacecraft went straight to Lasseru Star, and it came to the ground of Lasseru Star in just a flash. The ground is a piece of black land, and you can see hill-like boulders everywhere, like houses. These boulders are distributed all over the ground, and occasionally you can see aliens walking among the boulders. It is desolate and uninhabited. Even the aliens walking around are in tattered clothes, as if they are refugees. After the spaceship came to a stop, Retilia turned around and walked out. She looked hurried, as if she had something urgent to do. However, she paused after taking a few steps, and turned to look at Li Ming. Li Ming was at a loss for words. Retilia turned her right hand over, and a blue light flashed in her palm. The metal box appeared again. She handed it to Li Ming and said, "You should keep it for now." Li Ming looked puzzled, but still took the metal box. Seeing Li Ming take the box, Retilia turned around and said, "You two just wait for me here. You are not familiar with this place, so it's best not to walk around." As she said this, Retilia had already left the main cabin. Li Ming looked at the metal box in his hand, clenched his hand, and put it away. Hornston, who was standing beside him, was still sitting there motionless, not paying any attention, as if he hadn't heard it. Li Ming then sat down on the side, looking at the portal where Attilia left, and glanced at the operating table again. After a brief thought, he quietly turned his right hand, and a beam of green light flew out from his palm. The green light went straight to the ground through the spaceship. The green light was Li Ming's flying dragon. The flying dragon quietly followed Attilia, with the purpose of seeing where this guy was going. As soon as Attilia landed, she walked away along the uneven ground, and the flying dragon followed behind her, but only followed from a distance. After all, Attilia was also a spiritual civilization, and following too closely would inevitably be noticed. The road where Attilia walked was surrounded by those huge rocks. While following, the flying dragon did not forget to check around, and during this inspection, Li Ming still found some interesting places. These rocks around were not ordinary rocks, but rocks with teleportation capabilities, just like there were no portals that were opened. As long as they were activated by energy consciousness, they could be opened. In other words, these pieces of rocks were portals that I had not opened. As for where they led to, Li Ming was not sure. Attilia continued to walk, and Li Ming followed her, getting farther and farther away. Li Ming had no time to pay attention to the teleportation rocks around him, and just followed Attilia. At this time, aliens could be seen coming and going around, but these aliens looked rather desolate, and their civilization levels were also different. The most important thing was that these aliens were all individuals, and they didn't care about the others around them at all. It seemed that everyone had their own individual purpose for coming here, and as for the others, it had nothing to do with them. After following Attilia for a while, one of the aliens suddenly caught Li Ming's attention. This alien was a 2.3 level civilization, with hurried steps, thinking about something in his mind, and Li Ming happened to be very interested in what the other person was thinking about. This person hurriedly came to a rock, raised his hand and clapped it, and saw a flash of blue light, and a portal appeared, and this person then walked in. Li Ming did not dare to hesitate, and took advantage of the moment when the portal opened, and followed in with a flash of green light. The light flashed again, and the alien came to a dim cave. The temperature in the cave was extremely high. There was a stone road in the middle. On both sides of the stone road were two small red rivers, flowing slowly like two magmas. As soon as I came in, I heard the sound of clang, 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 as if someone was hitting something hard. At the end of the stone road, there were two forks on the left and right, and in the middle of the fork was a huge stove, like a big tripod. You couldn't see what was in the tripod, but you could see green smoke pouring out of it, and the magma on both sides of the stone road was also flowing out of it. The big tripod was black, but because of the high temperature, the outside of the big tripod occasionally appeared dark red, just like a piece of iron was burned red. The alien walked forward along the stone road with an unhappy look on his face, but at the end, he bypassed the big tripod from the fork, and came to an empty hall. In the hall, a big man with a naked upper body and a full beard, who looked similar to humans, was holding a hammer, and hitting hard on a round table, like a blacksmith, and the knocking sound came from here. As soon as the alien saw the big man, he said, "Jin Yao Cheng, what do you mean? Isn't the weapon you gave me able to cut off the Zilan beast? Why not? Do you know that I almost died?" The alien shouted angrily. After saying these two sentences, the big man Jin Yao Cheng immediately stopped hammering, raised his head, glanced at the other party with gloomy eyes, and said, "Adorno, I told you before that the weapon you paid for may be able to cut off the Zilan beast, but it is not certain." After saying this, Jin Yao Cheng swung the hammer in his hand, and continued to hammer. Adorno became even more angry after hearing this, and took a few steps forward again and said, "What is possible or impossible? What do you say? I don't care about that. You must make one for me. If you don't help me, I won't leave today. I tell you." Adorno kept talking, like a shrew, but Jin Yao Cheng ignored him at all, and didn't even look at him, and continued to hammer. However, at this moment, Li Ming had already stood up from the main cabin of the spaceship. After looking at Hornston, who was still concentrating with his eyes closed, he walked out. "Where are you going?" Hornston said without opening his eyes. Li Ming paused when he heard the voice, glanced behind him, and said, "I'll go out for a while, and we'll be back soon. If Radelia comes back, tell her." After saying this, Li Ming left quickly. Hornston slowly opened his eyes and looked at Li Ming, who was leaving without saying a word. However, his expression changed slightly. Li Ming, who left the spaceship, went straight to the rock where his consciousness had just entered. With a quick step, he soon arrived in front of the rock. Standing in front of the rock, he raised his hand and tapped it lightly. The blue light of the portal lit up again, and Li Ming walked in. He walked quickly along the stone road, as if he had been here many times before. He walked around the big tripod and came to the hall behind. As soon as Li Ming appeared, Jin Yao Cheng immediately stopped, stood up slowly, and looked up at Li Ming. Just now Adorno was still shouting, expressing his unwillingness, but after seeing Jin Yao Cheng's strange behavior, he closed his mouth and stopped. Adorno turned around and looked at Li Ming, and his momentum immediately rose again. After a strong snort, he said, "Jin Yao Cheng, if you don't compensate me today, then I won't let you take other jobs today. Neither of us can have an easy life." Li Ming was relatively calm. He then looked at Adorno with a pair of eyes, snorted lightly, smiled slightly, and then looked at the walls around him. There were weapons hanging everywhere on the wall. These weapons were completely different, and the quality was also very different. Some were cold weapons like swords, some were shooting weapons like guns and hand cannons, and some only had a handle. In short, there were all kinds of things. After reading this, Li Ming looked at Adorno and said, "You can choose any weapon on this wall. I will help you pay for it." Chapter 662 Separation. Adorno was stunned for a moment. His expression stiffened instantly, and he stammered with a trembling mouth, What did you just say?" Li Ming smiled slightly and said, "I said there are weapons on the wall that cost 100 yuan. You can pick any one you want. As long as the boss is willing to sell them, I will pay for the cost." After this, Adorno seemed to have just heard it clearly. He looked at Li Ming for a while, and then looked at Jin Yao Cheng. Jin Yao Cheng was also slightly surprised. He slowly put down the things in his hand, and looked at Li Ming seriously. After hesitating for a while, Jin Yao Cheng waved his hand directly. Although he didn't say a word, the gesture seemed to say, "You can pick any one you want." Adorno turned around excitedly, and walked to the wall, and carefully examined it. Jin Yao Cheng didn't look at Adorno, but stared at Li Ming with his eyes, and said, "Tell me, what weapon do you want to make?" Li Ming smiled slightly, turned his right hand, and a metal box appeared in his hand, and then threw it over. Jin Yao Cheng raised his hand to take the metal box, and his eyes followed the metal box in his hand. Li Ming looked at him intently and whispered, "Help me open it, you name a price." Jin Yao Cheng raised his head and looked at Li Ming again, but soon returned to the metal box. Just as he was about to say something, Adorno suddenly came over with a big knife and said triumphantly, "I want this." He was extremely satisfied with his smile. Jin Yao Cheng just glanced at Adorno and said, "Then take it and leave here." Adorno smiled slightly, swaggered out, and walked out with a satisfied look on his face. Watching Adorno leave, Jin Yao Cheng looked at Li Ming again and said, "Before talking about the price, let's talk about this box first. The metal used in this box is a rare composite material, and mutant energy was added during casting. To be precise, this is not a box, but a casting. If there is something inside, it was directly cast into it during casting. Because of the mutant energy, this box is abnormally hard." Jin Yao Cheng continued. While speaking, Jin Yao Cheng kept turning the metal box in his hand. After hesitating for a while, he said again, "The special composite metal, combined with the mutant energy, makes it impossible for people to sense the existence of energy." After speaking, Jin Yao Cheng put the box on the table in front of him, and looked at Li Ming quietly. After hearing so much, Li Ming naturally understood and immediately replied, "Just tell me the price, or how to open it." Jin Yao Cheng held the metal box with one hand, looked at Li Ming with his eyes, hesitated for a moment, and said, "Without mutant energy, this box cannot be opened. I can tell you how to open it, but the cost." Jin Yao Cheng did not say it directly, but the price in his mind had been seen through by Li Ming. Li Ming smiled slightly and said, "So, you can't open this box directly?" Jin Yao Cheng immediately snorted coldly, slapped the box with his palm, looked at Li Ming with some displeasure, and said, "Didn't I just say it? Only mutant energy can open it." If I have it, I will definitely help you open it. Li Ming did not respond immediately, but thought about it. Li Ming naturally has mutant energy, and the amount is very large, so there is no need to worry about it. As for opening the box, of course it is better to do it by yourself. If you give the mutant energy to the other party and ask him to help open it, then the secret of Sinti will naturally be known to the other party. It would be best if the fours in bodies could enjoy it alone. Thinking of this, Li Ming smiled and said, "Then tell me how to open it." While speaking, Li Ming looked up at the other party, but Jin Yao Cheng stood still and looked at Li Ming with a strange look. As soon as Li Ming received the other party's eyes, he immediately understood. He turned his right hand and a star bag appeared in his hand. He raised his hand and threw it to the other party. Jin Yao Cheng took the star bag in his hand. After a slight feeling, he showed satisfaction and said, "Special composite metals require special abilities to cut. This depends on what kind of energy was integrated into the box when it was made. This metal box is integrated with mutant energy. As long as you have mutant energy, you can use the cutting method made by mutant energy to open it." After that, he raised his hand and threw the box to Li Ming. Li Ming also raised his hand to take the box, turned his eyes, looked at the other party again, and said, "So simple." Jin Yao Cheng snorted and said, "As long as you find the right method, everything is simple. The key is that you need mutant energy." Li Ming looked at the metal box, hesitated for a moment, and said nothing more. He turned around and walked out. Li Ming's knowledge of energy is still very rich. There are many types of energy. The most common one is light energy, which is ordinary energy. It is also the energy that most aliens rely on. This kind of energy is common and sufficient, so it will be more applicable. It is also the most mainstream currency in transactions. The next is special energy. Special energy is non-light energy, which also includes elemental energy. Li Ming had obtained Yu energy before, and refined it into Loyang pill, which made his body several times stronger. Later, Li Ming also encountered easy energy, but Li Ming only got a small piece of residue of easy energy, and it also brought huge side effects to himself after using it. The next is dark energy. Like light energy, there are a large number of special energies, but this kind of energy is more difficult to collect. These are all special energies. And there is another kind of energy above these energies, that is, natural energy. This kind of energy is mixed energy, and is also rarer than special energy. Natural energy requires a special environment, and is formed by the convergence of various special energies. It is a completely naturally generated mixed energy. It is extremely powerful, but it is also extremely rare. Of course, it is not ruled out that this energy can be artificially synthesized. After all, the original easy energy belongs to synthetic energy. However, Li Ming has not seen similar energy appear at present, so even if it can be synthesized, it is extremely rare, and the synthesis method should only be in the hands of a few people. Knowing how to open the metal box, the next step is for Li Ming to find an opportunity to open the metal box. As long as he gets this in body, Li Ming can also advance. Thinking of this, Li Ming has already walked out. But at this time in the spaceship, the portal of the main cabin flashed, and Redelia had returned, with an extremely ugly face. As soon as she entered the main cabin, she looked around, and saw only the figure of Hornston, but Li Ming was gone. Redelia walked quickly to the operating table, raised her hand and said, "I need to leave here immediately. Do you want to go with me?" Hornston was shocked and looked back. Redelia was obviously in a hurry to leave. Hornston replied, "Then Li Ming, I need to leave immediately. This is an internal matter of the Zupping organization. If you don't want to go, stay here. I will come back to pick you up after I finish dealing with it." Redelia continued in a cold voice. From her tone, it can be heard that what Redelia is in a hurry to deal with is not a trivial matter, but it is because of this that Hornston has to think clearly. It seems that Goddess Redelia has a very important and urgent matter to deal with. After all, I haven't kissed the goddess feet yet, but I haven't obtained the whereabouts of natural energy from Li Ming yet. If we separate like this, it will be difficult to find an opportunity in the future. Hornston thought tangled in his mind. Standing up slowly, Hornston walked towards the portal of the main cabin and said, "I will go find you, Goddess Redelia." As he spoke, he stepped into the portal and disappeared with a flash of light. Looking at Hornston leaving, Raphaelia looked unhappy, raised her hand, and tapped the console, directly starting the spaceship, and whispered, "The guy who always mentions the goddess is useless at the critical moment." As she spoke angrily, the spaceship took off, and left the place. Chapter 663 Summoning Pet Beast. Li Ming, who was walking among the rocks, suddenly paused and looked up into the distance. He saw a capsule spaceship leaving the place quickly. "That spaceship is," Li Ming whispered. In Li Ming's memory, there seemed to be only one capsule spaceship in this area. Seeing this, Li Ming immediately quickened his pace. When he came to the place where the spaceship had just landed, Li Ming's brows tightened, and he looked intently. The spaceship had disappeared, but there was only one person standing on the ground in the distance, Hornston. Hornston looked up at the sky, then turned around, and seemed to sense Li Ming, and moved his feet towards Li Ming. Looking at Li Ming, Hornston said he had something urgent to do, so he left first. Li Ming looked at the sky, then looked at Hornston, and immediately showed that he was thinking about something else. He smiled and said, "Then why didn't you leave with your goddess?" After hearing this, Hornston hesitated for a while, looked at his right arm, and said, My arm still needs your treatment." Li Ming looked at him quietly, looked up at the sky again, and then turned and left. Li Ming knew very well that a guy whose mind was full of women's feet would not follow Redelia, but chose to follow himself. This made Li Ming alert. After all, Li Ming didn't know this guy very well. After walking for a while, Li Ming turned around and suddenly said, "Your arm will recover on its own after a while, and no further treatment is needed. I think we should separate here." Huh? Hornston was startled, hesitated for a moment, and asked, "Why?" Li Ming snorted, and said with a smile, "I'm used to being free alone, and I don't like being with others. Let's go our separate ways." As soon as the voice fell, Li Ming turned around, and walked away quickly. Hornston stood still, looking at Li Ming, who was leaving with a hesitant look in his eyes, but after a little thought, he still walked towards Li Ming quickly. However, Hornston did not come to Li Ming immediately, but just followed from a distance. Li Ming sensed Hornston behind him not long after walking. "Damn, this guy, what does it mean to follow me all the time?" As he walked, Li Ming frowned slightly. Li Ming walked aimlessly on the Lazarus Star. After leaving this rocky area, there was a black rocky ground, with hills and rocks occasionally visible. Wherever Li Ming went, Hornston followed him from a distance. When Li Ming stopped, he also stopped. When Li Ming continued to walk, he continued to follow. After walking for a while, Li Ming turned around and glared at him. Hornston just looked back at Li Ming from a distance without saying a word. "I finally got the method to open the metal box, but now there is such a dogskin plaster behind me." Li Ming looked at him unhappily, still thinking. But Hornston just stayed there quietly, motionless, as if he was relying on Li Ming. Li Ming stared at him, his eyes suddenly opened, blue light flashed in his eyeballs, a triangular pattern appeared, and blue light flashed on his body. Seeing Li Ming's action, Hornston was also startled, because Li Ming's action seemed to be about to take action. But the next moment, the energy on Li Ming's body suddenly rotated rapidly, and the blue energy aura completely enveloped Li Ming, and Li Ming whispered softly, "Teleport." A light sound of bang was heard, and Li Ming's figure disappeared from the spot. With Li Ming's current civilization level, plus the bonus of a 6-domain enhanced star, the distance of teleportation is naturally amazing. As soon as Li Ming disappeared, Hornston's eyes widened a little, and he whispered, "Disappeared." At this moment, Li Ming's figure flashed and appeared in a mountain range. As for where it was, Li Ming had no way of knowing, but it was certain that the distance of this teleportation had already left Hornston behind. The distance of teleportation under full power is naturally not comparable to that in an emergency. Looking around, he determined a location. There was a huge meteorite similar to a mountain, with a groove at the bottom, as if the ground was originally a big pit, but this huge meteorite covered it. Li Ming flew over, and only after he got closer could he see clearly that the top of the mountain was a cave entrance that was 100 meters long and 5 or 6 meters high, like a gap. Compared with the mountain, it was indeed very small, but for Li Ming, this gap was already large enough. It was pitch black inside, without a single ray of light. After checking around, Li Ming walked in directly. Once inside, Li Ming discovered something unusual. The deep cave was also sunken, like a big bowl, with the bottom leading directly underground, and there was no end in sight. Li Ming raised his hand and touched his chin. He did not continue to walk deeper, but leaned over and sat down where he was. This dark place was indeed a bit scary, and it was not ruled out that there would be some scary creatures in it, but now Li Ming only wanted to advance, and he could not care so much. With a flick of his cloak, the 5 beasts flew out. With a glance, Li Ming showed a look of surprise on his face. The 5 beasts were now very different, and even their levels had surpassed Li Ming. This made Li Ming look satisfied, and he said, "I want to advance in this cave, and my safety. I'll leave it to you." Walker's expression tightened, and he was the first to reply, "Don't worry, Master." Li Ming nodded with satisfaction, slowly sat down, and took out the metal box with his right hand. At this time, the 5 beasts had come to the outside of the cave. Walker glanced and said, "Zilong and Mogio are responsible for the safety inside the cave, and the fox beast and I are responsible for the safety of the cave entrance." "Okay." Zilong agreed immediately, turned into a ball of mist, and entered the cave. In an instant, the entire cave was completely covered by turbid smoke, and the Mogio Jinmu beast swam in the smoke like a golden snake, constantly releasing golden smoke. At the entrance of the cave, Walker slowly lay on the ground, staring at the distance without moving, and the fox beast also snuggled up to Walker. Moore looked at Zilong and the magic horned golden fungus beast who entered the cave, and then looked at Walker and the fox beast who were guarding the door. His eyes widened a little, and he glared at Walker and said, "What do you mean? What about me?" Walker looked up at the sky, glanced at Moore, and said, "You are responsible for aerial reconnaissance." Moore gritted his teeth angrily, looked at Walker fiercely, snorted coldly, and flew up with a flash of wings. His figure came into the air, and after flapping his wings a few times, he arrived at the top of the mountain. He stepped on the highest point of the mountain and still muttered, "I'm obviously the boss, but I'll let this guy boss me around." He muttered dissatisfiedly, and his eyes also looked into the distance. Looking at this, Moore's eyes suddenly paused and looked into the distance intently. In the distance of the mountains, dust and smoke were everywhere, and a battle was going on. Because the distance was too far, Moore could only see the general situation, but could not see the specific details. He frowned slightly, looked at the mountain under his feet, and then looked into the distance. Thinking in his heart, he whispered, "Sure enough, my aerial reconnaissance still occupies a very important position. Now I will go and inform Walker." Moore paused at this point, took a breath, and his eyes turned. His face suddenly tightened, and he said to himself again, "Isn't it time to show my strength now? I can stop it myself." As he said this, he moved and flew away. At this time, in the distance, an alien was fighting with a monster. The alien was Adorno, holding the big knife he chose from Jin Yeo Cheng. He waved it with excitement, and laughed ha ha ha, saying, "Sure enough, it's more fun to have a handy weapon." The monster fighting with Adorno was a monster with a body like a scorpion, but a tail with 3 stripes, which was the Zilan beast. The beast's body is dark grey, like a stone statue. Its front body is similar to a scorpion, and its small head is covered with spots. On both sides are 2 huge pincers, which look extremely ferocious. Chapter 664, Quarrel. The 3 tails behind the Zilan beast had a sphere at the top, similar to a hammer, with stripes on them, and one of the tails had been broken into 2. Adorno's sharp technique made his sword skills extraordinary. When swinging, the weapon continued to release waves of energy. Although the Zilan beast was powerful, it could only retreat in the face of such a sharp weapon. Moore flapped his wings and quickly came to the sky above this area, looking down from a high position. The battle below was also extremely fierce at this moment, but the Zilan beast was obviously not able to support it. The 3 tails and 2 large pincers that it relied on for attack were no longer useful at this moment. Under the sharp sword, the Zilan beast's defense was already inadequate. Unable to attack, unable to defend, and even more unable to escape. Under Adorno's sharp and swift sword shadow, the Zilan beast was quickly torn into pieces. The 2 large pincers and 3 tails used for attack had been completely cut off, leaving only a body. Adorno held the broadsword tightly, smiled slightly, and said, "Now, it's time to hand over your beast core." As he spoke, he suddenly jumped up and slashed at the Zilan beast, which was only left with its body. Red light flashed, and the sharp blade broke through the air twice. With this blow, the body of the Zilan beast was directly split into two and cut in the middle. This blow was magnificent and powerful, with red energy ripples, as if a mountain could be cut in half. Holding the broadsword in his hand, he stood beside the severed Zilan beast, smiled and said, "This feeling of wielding a broadsword is really comfortable." As he spoke, he raised his right hand and held the broadsword on his shoulder. At the same time, he grabbed the cut flesh of the Zilan beast, and a grey bead flew out of the flesh. With a pop, it fell into Adorno's hand. This grey bead is the beast core in the body of the demon beast. The corner of his mouth slightly raised, and he clenched his palm to collect the bead. Moore, who had been watching all this, opened his eyes wide in the sky. Sweat beads even kept flowing down his little head. Under his trembling lips, he whispered in fear, so powerful?" Moore was whispering this, and Adorno below suddenly looked up at the sky and found Moore's figure. The man and the beast looked at each other at this moment, and their expressions changed. Moore shrank and looked down with a worried look, while Adorno also opened his eyes in surprise, but his face was full of surprise. His mouth opened a little wider and whispered, this bird looks unusual." As he said this, his eyes showed a bit of other thoughts. After a chuckle, he moved and flew into the sky. Seeing this, Moore flapped his wings hurriedly, turned around and ran away. He flapped his wings hard suddenly, and with a scream of quack quack, his body flew out, but because of the sudden excess of force, several feathers fell off during the flapping. Seeing Moore running away, Adorno accelerated his flying speed, and with a look of joy on his face, he said loudly, "It seems that there will be unexpected gains today." Moore had a horrified expression on his face, and his eyes were even bloodshot. He flapped his wings desperately, and the speed was like a machine, not daring to stop at all. The faster Moore ran away, the more excited Adorno behind him became, making a ha-ha sound, and his body speed did not slow down at all. After flying for only a moment, Moore saw the mountain just now, diving down at a high speed, and kept shouting, "Help! Help! Ah! Help!" Below was the crack hole at the bottom of the mountain. Walker suddenly stood up and looked up, only to see Moore struggling to rush over, and rushing straight to Walker's body. Walker's body was slightly shaken, and Moore, who had no time to slow down, fell heavily to the ground with a bang. But at this moment Moore could no longer care about the pain in his body, and quickly got up, and squatted behind Walker. Walker did not move, and stared at the distance. There was an alien flying in the air. It was Adorno. Seeing Walker and the fox beast, Adorno paused and stopped. After a concentrated glance, he smiled slightly and slowly pulled out the big knife. "Today's luck is really good. Not only did I get a handy weapon, but I also got a few rare monsters. Ha ha ha." His face was full of excitement, and he held the big knife tightly in his hand. Walker turned his eyes and glanced at Moore, who was trembling behind him, and whispered, "This idiot can only cause trouble. Let it be on guard." But it caused trouble. After all, if he doesn't cause trouble, he will be uncomfortable. It's just right. It's time to see the results of such a long period of training. As he said this, his eyes immediately looked straight at Adorno. Just as Walker was about to make a move, a red tail suddenly blocked Walker's body. The fox beast slowly stepped forward a few steps, looked at Walker and said, "Brother Walker, let me do it, okay? HMPH. Walker snorted lightly, raised his front paw, pushed away the red tail, and said, "For now, it's not your turn." But just as Walker was about to step forward, a cloud of smoke suddenly floated out of the cave, and the smoke rolled and blocked Walker's body, forming a one-eyed monster. It was Zilang. "I haven't been imprisoned for too long, let me do it." While Zilang was speaking, the one-eyed eyeball had already turned to Adorno. "Wait." Walker called out to Zilang, saying, "We have already assigned them. You are responsible for the safety of the master inside, but the outside is not your responsibility." Zilang looked unhappy when he heard this, and said loudly, "Last time you took action, I was the only one protecting the master. This time, you should give it back to me." The voices of these guys' discussion immediately reached Adorno's ears, and Adorno, who was originally excited, immediately showed some strangeness. He looked back and forth with his eyes, and couldn't help but get angry when listening to their conversation. He gritted his teeth, and the hand holding the big knife trembled slightly. He couldn't help but say a few words from his teeth. A group of beasts are mumbling here. Do they really think I'm air? As the voice of the last two words became louder, he suddenly jumped up, swung the big knife in his hand, and chopped directly at Walker. Dang. A violent collision sound was heard. Before the broadsword came close, a black tail suddenly blocked the attack. The hair of the tail was all black, seemingly ordinary, and the hair was still fluttering in the wind. But when the broadsword chopped it down, it was like chopping on some hard metal. Not even a hair was cut off, and the palm holding the handle of the knife was also shaking and painful. Bang! A strange force came from the tail, and Adorno was bounced away. His body flipped sharply in the air, leaning down to the ground, holding the knife in one hand, and lying on the ground with the other hand, his legs half squatting, and his eyes looked fiercely at the tail that had just blocked the attack. The tail slowly shrank and shortened, and finally came behind the fox beast. After the tail faded, the fox beast, Walker and Zilong all opened their eyes wide, and looked at Adorno. After just looking for a second, Walker turned his head, and continued to say to Zhuolang, "Don't forget, between us, I have the final say. The safety inside is your responsibility." Zhuolang still had a look of dissatisfaction on his face. His one eye widened slightly and said, "You have the final say. That depends on my mood. I'm very unhappy right now. I advise you to be sensible." The two ignored others and continued to quarrel, which made Adorno a little confused. But after a second, the puzzled look immediately turned into anger. He clenched his teeth and whispered, "I, Adorno, have been hunting beasts for so many years, but this is the first time I've been laughed at by a wild beast. It's the first time I've been laughed at by you beasts." Adorno roared angrily, and his body stood up suddenly. His body surface suddenly flashed with blue light, and the breath of energy immediately spread. Chapter 665. Tense moment. Beast Hunter, but the nemesis of all beasts. Adorno shouted, and raised his sword, and slashed it down fiercely. The powerful energy aura burned from Adorno's body surface to the sword, and then swung it down in front of him. Suddenly, a huge energy wave shot out from the blade, and the ripples were full of powerful energy aura. Adorno, who was a level 2.3 civilization, was already at the top of the first interval of the second level civilization. The energy rich in this attack was also extremely powerful and extraordinary. However, before the ripples approached, Zilong suddenly turned his eyes, and a cloud of smoke swept out. The smoke shuttled like a python, and black matter began to form at the top of the smoke. The black matter continued to gather and condense, and finally turned into a physical hand, aiming at the flying slashing wave and grabbing it. Although Zilong was in the state of smoke, it could also be transformed into a physical entity through the condensation of smoke. This happened when Li Ming first met Zilong. Bang! A violent muffled sound was heard, lightning flashed, energy radiated, black arcs kept jumping, and Zilong's materialized big hand actually grabbed the slashing wave in his hand. Adorno saw this scene, and stepped back in surprise, unable to believe what he saw. And Zilong's materialized big hand then clenched hard. Snap! The slashing wave shattered like glass in an instant, turning into starlight, and disappearing in the air. Adorno gritted his teeth tightly, his body trembled slightly on the spot, looking at the huge black hand, at a loss for a moment. After all, Zilong came from another world, and the monsters in this other world were naturally not comparable to the monsters in the current universe. Moreover, under the nourishment of Li Ming Shenhe Hingayan Shang, Zilong also had a height of 2.3, and his strength was naturally extremely powerful. The big hand was a physical entity, but the arm was indeed formed by smoke. When it was waved, it seemed to be ready to attack Adorno at any time. But at this moment, Walker suddenly took 2 steps forward and said, "Okay, Zhuolang, your muscle exercises are over. Now, it's my turn." What? I haven't done anything yet." Zhuolang suddenly shouted unwillingly. But Walker had already walked over slowly, staring at Adorno with his eyes, and said, "It seems that you are a master of using a knife. That's great." As Walker slowly approached, Adorno grabbed the handle of the knife with his right hand, his expression tense, and his eyes occasionally looked at the fox beast and Zhuolang. Walker clearly noticed this and said directly, "Don't worry, no one will participate in the fight between you and me. Let go." Adorno's attention quickly focused on Walker again, his eyes staring at him, and he was already saying fiercely in his heart, "Then kill this beast first, and then deal with the others." Thinking of this, he suddenly exerted force with his feet, and his body rushed out like an arrow, shooting out quickly, with a clang sound. Adorno, who was close to him, swung his sword, but Walker, who seemed calm and composed, raised his claws, and 3 sharp blades sprang out from the gaps between his claws. Adorno turned over at high speed, and slashed from the side. By changing his body movements, he switched the direction and position of attack, but Walker had seen through all these attacks. No matter how the opponent attacked, Walker easily blocked them. Adorno's body shape kept changing, sometimes left, sometimes right, sometimes up, sometimes down, and the direction of attack also changed accordingly, but Walker remained motionless in the same place, with a pair of sharp claws flexibly turning over to block all the opponent's attacks. Adorno's body movements were obviously professionally trained, and his attacks were also compact and intensive, but he showed serious deficiencies in dealing with Walker. This forced Adorno to turn over and retreat to a distance after the attack. His solemn face immediately became ugly, and his brows were tightly furrowed. Originally, he wanted to kill Walker quickly and then deal with other monsters, but now it seems that Adorno's strength is still far behind. Walker looked at Adorno, who had retreated far away. His eyes narrowed, a cold light flashed in his eyes, and he whispered, "Now, it's my turn." As soon as he finished speaking, with a fierce expression, his body disappeared with a bang, leaving only a cloud of dust in the place. But the next moment, Walker's figure had appeared in front of Adorno. 2 cat claws then stretched out. The sound of swoosh, swoosh, swoosh quickly entered his ears, and the rapid sound had already made people feel its extremely fast attack speed. The speed of the 2 cat claws waving was like a phantom, and could not be captured at all. It looked like cats at home fighting. If they didn't move, it would be fine. Once they attacked an object, the continuous attack of the cat claws was extremely crazy, as if they were waving their arms wildly with their eyes closed. However, Walker's current attack was naturally intentional, but it looked unpredictable. Walker's speed was extremely fast, jumping up and down, left and right, seemingly similar to Adorno's attack method just now, but his attack speed and flexibility far exceeded the opponent. After the attack, Walker rolled back to where he was. Looking at Adorno again, he was covered in scales and bloodstains. Looking at Walker again, he was terrified and retreated slightly, as if he was about to escape. He looked around, from the fox beast to Walker, and then from Walker to Zhuling. He retreated slightly and whispered tremblingly, "This group of beasts, no, this group of demon beasts, have they been on the planet Lasso for a long time?" He whispered as he retreated. Walker looked at the other party, and had lost interest in fighting. He turned around, and looked at the fox beast, saying, "You will finish it." As he spoke, his body had already walked towards the cave entrance. The fox beast then took 2 steps forward, and the blue tail behind it suddenly grew larger and longer, aiming at the position where Adorno was, and swung it hard. With just this swing, a blue beam of light shot out from its tail. The blue light fell from the sky like a fireball. The cold wind was blowing everywhere, and it was a ball of icy energy. The blue light flashed and approached Adorno. Facing the blue light energy ball, Adorno was terrified. His eyes widened, and his mouth slightly opened. His body surface was glittering, and he raised the big knife in his hand and cut it. At this moment, a golden light flashed in the sky, followed by a loud boom, and a huge ice block more than 10 meters high and wide had formed. Adorno was not frozen. The ice block was in front of Adorno. The violent sound made Walker pause and look back. Even the turbid beast was one-eyed and looked over. In the huge ice block, there was a cross, and it was the cross that was frozen just now. The 3 beasts were staring blankly, and the ice block broke with a bang, and then a figure fell from the sky and squatted steadily on the top of the cross. The person who came was Hornston. When he saw Hornston, Walker's expression immediately tightened, and his demeanor became serious. Zhuling also shrank the smoke, and looked at Hornston. After all, Hornston was a 2.6 level civilization, belonging to the top of the second interval. This level was naturally extraordinary, and its sudden appearance at this time was naturally taken seriously. Hornston looked at the beasts in front of him. The fox beast had 7 tails, and each tail was a different color. It had a strong elemental aura. Walker was dark gray overall, and its body was full of dark energy, which looked extraordinary. More revealed natural energy, and the colorful feathers were very eye-catching. Finally, there was Zualang. On the surface, it looked like just a ball of smoke, but it revealed the aura of a demon beast. This kind of beast that existed in smoke was very rare, and Hornston also took a few more glances. Each one is not simple. No matter how you look at it, they don't look like beasts that grew up naturally. Thinking secretly in his heart, a pair of eyes suddenly locked onto the gap cave behind these beasts. Walker noticed the change in his expression immediately. He narrowed his eyes slowly, as if he was exerting some strength on his limbs. He whispered, "Get ready." Fox Beast and Zilong were also naturally ready. Hornston was still looking at the crevice cave. His face darkened slightly. He whispered, "So, there should be some secret in that cave. Then, let me see it clearly." As he said this, he slowly raised his hands. Golden light flashed on his palms. 2 golden spheres had already formed. He then clapped his hands vigorously. After a pop sound, he put his hands together in front of his chest and whispered, "Get out." Chapter 666 Star Beast, Feng Hao. Hornston saw the abnormality of the beasts in front of him, and also noticed the gap cave. He was about to use the sensing ability of Water Lily to see the situation in the cave. The energy was already gathered in his hands, and he just said the word out. Before it was fully activated, a black shadow suddenly flashed in front of Hornston. Swoosh, clang. This black shadow was Walker. The sharp claw blade grew out from the claw gap. This attack was to grab Hornston's neck. The speed was very fast, just like Li Ming's instantaneous slash. The attacking claw blade was different from the previous battle with Adorno. The claw blade at this time flashed with black arcs, which looked extremely powerful. This attack was fast and unexpected, but it still did not hit Hornston, but hit the huge cross. Just now when Walker attacked, Hornston made an emergency retreat. Although he retreated only 1 meter away, the moment his body retreated, the cross under his feet rose to his front and blocked Walker's attack. Hornston suddenly raised his hand and patted the cross in front of him. A light buzzing sound was heard, and the surface of the cross flickered, and Walker was directly ejected. The force was like a balloon that burst, and the shock wave spread violently to the front of the cross. Under this force, Walker flew out and fell into the air in the distance. Hornston's right hand was still on the cross at this time, and then he waved his arm to the side, and the cross turned and came behind Hornston with a swing of his arm. But Hornston's eyebrows tightened, his eyes looked around, and his expression suddenly tensed. He saw that the surroundings were already swelling and rolling smoke, and the smoke formed a ring that surrounded Hornston and Adorno in the middle. The vortex formed by the smoke was not large, like a big python swimming around Hornston. The smoke was connected to the ground below, and it reached a height of 100 meters above, and it was still growing little by little, blocking the surrounding mountains and completely blocking the gap hole that Hornston had just noticed. The smoke was constantly rotating. At this time, except for the sky above the head, all other places were blocked by the smoke, like a circular wall. The sky above the head was still shrinking little by little. It was the smoke that was stitching up little by little, which made the already dark environment begin to become dark. Looking at the smoke around him, and then looking at Walker in the distance, Hornston's eyes finally stopped on his right arm and whispered, "My right arm is not very flexible now, and I can't use it too much, but these monsters are obviously extraordinary, so I can only..." Hornston muttered to himself, and his right arm was still light green, but it was much better than the previous dark green. This was also thanks to Li Ming's treatment, but at this time, the right arm obviously couldn't be used too much, and it needed to be used with caution. Hornston raised his left hand, and his palm came to his neck, grabbed a white bead in the necklace on his neck, and then pulled it hard, and the white bead was taken off. In his left hand, golden light flashed, and he slowly threw it into the air, and the white bead flew to the top of his head. The white bead continued to rise, and rushed to the sky. The smoke in the sky was closing up little by little, and the area wrapped in the smoke was getting darker and darker. As the smoke in the sky continued to gather, the weak light was gradually shrinking, just like a thick light was gradually turned off. But just when the smoke power blocked the area below and plunged it into complete darkness, the white bead suddenly stopped in the middle of the smoke. Just like a sack was about to be sealed, and suddenly a bead appeared. The bead stopped and rotated in place. The bead was only the size of an egg, but once it rotated, it actually drove the airflow around it. This made an air vortex appear around the white bead, making it impossible for the smoke to be closed and locked directly. Hornston glanced at the sky, raised the corners of his mouth, and whispered, "Let the beasts fight each other. Come out." Star Beast whined Queen. As soon as the voice fell, the white bead suddenly rotated more violently, and the original air vortex suddenly turned into a hurricane vortex. The suddenly strengthened airflow not only prevented the smoke from merging, but also blew away the smoke around it bit by bit. Bang! A violent muffled sound was heard. The white bead suddenly exploded. When I heard the sound and looked up, a huge airflow exploded instantly, and the smoke that was about to close up suddenly dissipated. The smoke that rose to a height of 100 meters instantly dissipated under the impact of the bursting airflow, leaving only a dozen meters high. The dark sky suddenly became bright at this moment, and the airflow spread in a circular shape to the surroundings. Not only the surroundings, but also the ground below could clearly feel the impact of the airflow. It was as if a hurricane blew down from the top of the head, causing the sand and dust on the ground to float and scatter. After the impact of the airflow, there was already a figure in the sky. This person's body was translucent, like a layer of gauze, with a woman's head, a fan-shaped cloak behind the neck, and a hood on the cloak, but it was not buckled on the head, and the body only had the upper body and arms, and the lower body was completely missing. Like a ghost. The translucent body, like a ghost, with a human face and upper body, is extremely strange. This is the Star Beast, Feng Hao. Walker looked at the sky, his brows slightly tightened, and whispered, "It seems that the plan has failed." The face of the turbo beast in the smoke appeared faintly, saying, "I wanted to create a smoke field, but now I'm afraid it won't work." Walker looked up at the sky, his eyes turned, and he looked at the turbo beast again, saying, "The guy in the sky seems to be your nemesis." Hearing this, Zilong immediately showed displeasure and said, "Humph, you still underestimate me too much, then leave this guy to me." Walker had this in mind. As soon as Zilong's voice fell, the smoke suddenly swept up. At this moment, the smoke kept gathering and gathering, and it was like condensation. At this time, Walker turned his eyes and looked at Hornston, who had a calm face. Looking at Walker and other beasts in front of him, his face showed disdain, and he looked up at the translucent Feng Hao in the sky. "Let's start." "Feng Hao," Hornston said coldly. Feng Hao did not respond. He looked down coldly with a cold expression. His shadowy right hand slowly raised, and his palm pointed directly down. After a quick glance, his eyes tightened slightly, and he said sternly, "Wind tunnel." After this life, Feng Hao's palm suddenly flashed with white light, and a light spot shot out. The light spot came to the vicinity of Walker and Zilong in just a flash. This light spot was not big, and there was no abnormality. Walker and Zilong both showed puzzled expressions, but the next second, the light spot suddenly brightened, and the surrounding space immediately distorted, and a vortex tens of meters long and wide was formed in an instant. The violent vortex rotated around the white spot and generated a strong suction. Walker and Zilong's bodies immediately became unable to move under this suction, as if their bodies were pulled by some force. This wind tunnel is not a vortex type, but with a center as the point, constantly generating suction, pulling the surrounding objects closer, and that center is the light spot. Walker and the turbo beast were constantly pulled in by this force. A cloud of smoke and a cat were pulled together. The suction did not stop there, but it was getting stronger. Even the fox beast and more in the distance were pulled in. The fox beast kept grabbing the ground with its claws. Its tense expression was trying to get rid of it, but under the suction, these actions were obviously in vain. Moore's claws kept scratching the ground and flapping his wings, but he couldn't get rid of the suction either. Compared with Moore, the fox beast's grip was obviously stronger. It was constantly pulled into the ground by the suction, and Moore rolled over and passed by the fox beast. The claws grabbed the fox beast's head. It was like a person being grabbed by another person's hair. The fox beast relied on its forelimbs to grab the ground. When Moore grabbed its head, its body flipped violently, and the two beasts were directly sucked in. Chapter 667, about level 3 civilization. The four beasts were firmly attached together by the suction force and could not move at all. At this time, Hornston looked at this direction with his eyes fixed and slowly raised his left hand. The golden light flashed in the palm of his hand, and the golden shadow energy had emerged. After a while, the shadow golden energy transformed into the shape of a hammer. Hornston looked at the four beasts that were firmly bound by the suction force and slowly raised his left hand. His mouth opened and he said, "No matter where you come from, it's time to end here." Hammer of confusion. He swung his left hand violently, and the golden hammer in his hand flashed and instantly turned into a huge golden shadow hammer. The top of the hammer was like a mountain, falling from the sky, and it was hitting the four beasts in the wind tunnel. The four beasts were pulled by the powerful suction of the wind tunnel and could not move at all. This hammer would definitely smash the four beasts into meat patties. Hornston and Feng Hao seemed to be very skilled in cooperation, like two partners who cooperated tacitly. The four beasts were tightly together under the effect of the wind tunnel. When they noticed the hammer above their heads, they all showed fear. Once the hammer fell, it would be fatal. Bang! The golden light spread out, and a loud noise followed, as if a golden hammer hit a golden gong. A golden round golden shield suddenly appeared above the heads of the four beasts, like a golden pancake, blocking the attack. Hornston frowned and looked at it intently. Under the golden shield, a person stood there, with a white cloak fluttering constantly, holding a golden shield in one hand. This person was Li Ming. However, Li Ming was already a 2.6 civilization at this time, and he also looked at Hornston with all his attention. When he saw that it was Li Ming, Hornston was slightly surprised, and soon his left hand loosened, and the golden hammer also popped, and turned into a star point in the air and disappeared. Li Ming saw this, and slowly retracted his raised arm, and the golden shield disappeared. As for the wind tunnel below, it also stopped. The light spot in the center of the wind tunnel also turned into a light spot and disappeared after the suction disappeared. Li Ming looked up at the sky. The wind queen in the sky turned and flew towards Hornston. However, during the flight, the light on her body flashed and turned into a white bead and fell down. Hornston took the bead in one hand, patted it on his chest, and returned to the necklace again. "It seems your arm has recovered," Li Ming said lightly. Hornston smiled and replied, "If you know it's you here, I won't do anything." Li Ming didn't care at all. He moved and flew towards Hornston. While approaching him, Li Ming's eyes turned and suddenly saw a doorknob behind Hornston. He stared at this person with his eyes. After just a few seconds, he understood the whole story. He stopped a few dozen meters away from Hornston and his eyes returned to Hornston. Staring at the other party like this, Li Ming's brows could not help but slightly frowned, thinking, this guy. Li Ming has already spent 4 Zin bodies to advance from the 2nd level civilization to the 2.6 level civilization. At this time, Li Ming's strength is naturally far beyond his level. After all, the energy required for Li Ming's advancement is incomparable to that of ordinary aliens. In addition to the energy volume, that is 3 times that of ordinary aliens, the energy that Li Ming advances is also natural energy, so the quality is also beyond the reach of aliens. With Li Ming's current wisdom, eyes and mental power, even the consciousness of the 3rd interval will be directly detected. But Hornston in front of him is obviously only a 2.6 level civilization, but Li Ming cannot rely on his wisdom eyes to passively view all the information in his brain. What I can see is only part of the information, which is obviously unreasonable, so Li Ming is also a little surprised. Looking at Hornston, Li Ming's expression changed slightly, and he said, "It seems that we should have a good chat alone." Hornston looked back at Li Ming, hesitated for a moment, and replied with a serious face, "Well, it would be great if I could talk to you openly about some things." Hearing this, Li Ming was more certain of his guess, turned around, and flew away. When he flew over the 4 beasts, Li Ming shook his cloak, and the 4 beasts turned into 4 beams of light, and entered Li Ming's cloak, and then flew away. Hornston also hesitated for a moment, and flew after them. Adorno, who had been staying alone in the same place, turned around after watching the two leave, and hurriedly left the place. At the top of a lonely peak, Li Ming paused, stopped on a rock, leaned over and sat down, looking into the distance, without saying a word. Hornston followed closely behind and also stopped on the rock behind Li Ming. At this time, you can directly see the starry sky and universe, with bright stars and dark airspace. In this cautious environment, people's mentality will calm down little by little. His eyes turned slightly, and he glanced at Hornston behind him, and then continued to look at the starry sky and universe, whispering, "You have been following me, there must be some purpose. Tell me." Hornston's eyes were also fixed on Li Ming, and he was not very anxious at this moment, and replied, "Being able to sit down and talk with you like this, I'm not so eager to know what I want to know. Why not talk about something else first?" Li Ming's eyebrows suddenly tightened, and his sitting figure did not move. He could not obtain the information in the other party's brain under the consciousness induction. His mouth was closed, and he did not say a word, but his expression became serious. Hornston continued, "You deliberately avoided me just to advance." Li Ming's eyes turned to the other party again. Judging from the current situation, this was naturally obvious. However, Li Ming, who had already reached level 2.6 civilization, naturally did not care. After a light snort, he said, "Isn't it the goal of every life to achieve a higher civilization?" Hornston nodded lightly, but his face suddenly became serious. He said, "I advise you to give up. The current level of civilization is enough to travel comfortably in the universe. Continuing to pursue higher levels may have consequences that you cannot predict." Li Ming's sitting body suddenly turned, looking directly at Hornston with a serious expression, and said, "What do you mean by this sentence?" Hornston also looked back at Li Ming solemnly, but did not respond immediately. Instead, after some thought, he said, "Because the third level civilization is the pinnacle of all advanced civilizations and the end point of carbon-based life, everything should end here. When you reach the third level civilization, you will gain unprecedented cognition, but you will also face the end of everything. Why bother? Ha ha ha." After a burst of laughter, Hornston smiled as if he was recalling something beautiful, and said, "Isn't it better to enjoy the life now?" These words sounded light and indifferent, but Li Ming could see that this Hornston in front of him was extraordinary, and he seemed to know a lot about the third level civilization. These words also attracted Li Ming's great attention. Li Ming's goal was naturally to pursue the pinnacle of the highest civilization in the universe. Hearing what the other party said, how could Li Ming not care? He stared at the other party with his eyes and said, "You know a lot about the third level civilization, but you have said so much. Are you trying to persuade me not to advance? Or are you trying to stop me from entering the third level civilization?" Hornston rolled his eyes and said, "Without you, I would have lost an arm. Kangla civilization is very grateful. I don't mean to persuade you or stop you, but I'm still interested in telling you something about the third level civilization." Li Ming was full of interest in advanced civilizations, just like the curiosity of humans on Earth about aliens, but this curiosity is often not satisfied. Once satisfied, it also brings the fear of the unknown. From the few words that Hornston had said before, Li Ming could sense that the third level civilization must exist, and entering the third level civilization was extremely dangerous. Hornston crossed his arms and looked into the deep space as if he was thinking about something, but he opened his mouth and began to tell Li Ming about the third level civilization. Unable to directly sense Hornston's consciousness, Li Ming could only make up his mind and understand from his words, and the door to the cognition of the third level civilization had already opened a gap in Li Ming's brain. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 668 Dark Technology. Level 3 Civilization is a highly ruled civilization area. The place where Hornston belongs is the Level 2 supercluster, Laniakia supercluster. The Laniakia supercluster covers a wide area, and many superclusters are included in it. It is a node of civilization development, and is also called the highest civilization. Hornston belongs to the Kangla civilization, a member of the Level 3 civilization, but he is not a ruler. The biggest enemy of the level 3 civilization is no longer the war seen by biological beings, but the monopoly of technological civilization. Technological civilization is divided into two factions, dark technological civilization and technological civilization. Both belong to technological civilization, just like two branches. Of course, there will be multiple branches in a civilization, which is not surprising. The difference is that the direction of technological civilization development is different. Dark technological civilization is mainly driven by dark energy and occupies a dominant position, while technological civilization is driven by ordinary energy or special energy. Known civilizations include power civilization, biological civilization, spiritual civilization, wisdom civilization, space civilization and geocentric civilization. Space civilization and geocentric civilization are extremely rare, while the other four civilizations are common. These civilizations also exist in the broad sense of civilization. For example, the Pumi civilization of the Pumi people includes these four civilizations, and even includes technological civilization, but it is still very different from the real technological civilization. The dark technological civilization is the real ruler of the third level civilization, but they will not restrict ordinary civilizations from advancing to the third level civilization, which is completely different from the blockade of the second level civilization. However, the dark technological civilization can detect the existence of biological civilization creatures of the third level civilization through technological equipment. This is also a kind of energy detection. Because as the level of civilization increases, the energy volume in the body of civilized organisms will also increase, and the monitoring equipment of the dark technological civilization is to discover the existence of these third level civilizations. Under this monitoring equipment, the energy in each third level civilization is like an energy point, just like radar detecting other things, and it will be monitored when it reaches that volume. Find the advanced third level civilization in the entire area, then capture it, and improve the machinery and equipment. In short, it is to transform the biological third level civilization into a technological third level civilization, just like the synthesis of the orcs, and use this method to maintain the high continuation of civilization. The Kangala civilization, which is also a level 3 civilization, faces the risk of being captured. In order to avoid this capture, the Kangala civilization faces only two choices. One is to resist, and the other is to hide. According to Hornston, the resistance has failed, and this failure of resistance is the catastrophe that Li Ming saw from Hornston's consciousness before. Under the failed battle, the Kangala civilization can only flee in a scattered manner, but fleeing is not just running away, but every Kangala person who is determined to escape must be sealed. The seal here is to seal the energy in the body, which is why Hornston is only a level 2.6 civilization at the moment. After the seal, it can avoid the monitoring of the dark technology civilization, and thus it can escape smoothly. In other words, Hornston is now a level 3 civilization, but the energy in the body is sealed, which is only a level 2.6 civilization. After hearing these contents, Li Ming roughly understood that the advancement of the level 2 civilization to the level 3 civilization will not be restricted by the advanced civilization, unlike the level 2 civilization world, which requires a lot of effort to enter. But there is also a more serious problem, that is, after entering the third level civilization, they will be captured and transformed by the third level dark technology civilization. This is exactly the same as the Orc civilization, and of course it is the most terrifying. Knowing this, Li Ming's expression gradually became gloomy, and he fell into deep thought. Li Ming has seen the strength of Hornston. He is definitely not an ordinary third level civilization. He is also a person who survived the energy vortex in the eye of the earth. Such a powerful existence has to seal the energy to avoid it. Li Ming naturally has to pay attention to it and be mentally prepared for the advancement to the third level civilization in the future. Li Ming's goal will not change, that is to achieve the highest civilization in the universe, but now it seems to have reached a bottleneck period. Looking at Li Ming's thoughtful face, Hornston knew what Li Ming was thinking at the moment, and then said, "You don't have to care too much. There are many alien life forms that have advanced to the third level civilization. Maybe there will be a strong one who can get rid of the shackles of the dark technology civilization." Li Ming looked up and suddenly became a little more energetic when he heard this. But Hornston immediately laughed a few times and replied, "Unfortunately, I haven't seen it yet." Li Ming glanced at the other party and sighed slightly. After thinking for a while, Li Ming didn't care much. After all, it was still a long way to advance to the third level civilization. Li Ming needed to get 2 more Zin bodies to break through to the third interval. That was the time to consider advancing to the third level civilization. It was too early to worry about it now. He took a deep breath, smiled slightly, and said, "I have said so much, but you haven't told me the reason for following me. If you don't tell me, I don't want to hear it." Looking at Li Ming's smiling face, Hornston also laughed twice, and then said, "Now the fugitives of the Kangala civilization race have basically stabilized. The next moment, we will reunite and return to Laniakia. When we left Laniakia, we also arrived at unfamiliar places through the space-time teleportation array. After this gathering, we still have to continue the race civilization and find opportunities to resist the dark technology civilization again," Hornston said in a heavy tone. Li Ming just looked back at the other person with a calm expression. At this point, Hornston's firm eyes immediately looked at Li Ming again and said again, "You once did an information transaction with Sexton. At that time, you used natural energy. If you want to activate the space-time teleportation array to return to Laniakia, you need a certain amount of natural energy. So, this is why I'm looking for you." Li Ming's expression changed slightly when he heard this. He thought about it and immediately understood it, but his eyes widened a little and said, "Sexton is also from the Kangala civilization." Hornston nodded slightly and replied, "We fugitives are connected to each other. There are 3 people in these superclusters, me, Sexton, and Balderston, who is still in the Peacock Indian supercluster. We need to accumulate enough natural energy before we can return to Laniakia," Hornston said firmly. Li Ming naturally saw it. Li Ming naturally understood the racial justice. As a third level civilization, Hornston could calm down and talk to him, which was enough to show the essence of a civilization. Moreover, the enemy of Kangala civilization is dark technology civilization. According to Hornston, Li Ming will inevitably face the same enemy after entering the third level civilization. Therefore, helping Hornston at this time is equivalent to helping himself in the future. Thinking of this, Li Ming smiled lightly and said, "You don't have to look for natural energy. As for the source of the energy, you don't have to know, but I can provide all the amount you need." Ah. Hornston was shocked and stared at Li Ming blankly. After hesitating for a while, he laughed out loud and said, "That's great." Even as he said this, Hornston still showed a worried look. After hesitating for a while, he said, "It's just that the energy demand is very large. Are you sure you have enough natural energy?" Li Ming chuckled and replied with confidence, "Don't worry, what I have can definitely meet your needs. Don't worry about this." Hearing Li Ming's affirmative statement, Hornston naturally let go of the newcomer. From Li Ming's words, Hornston could naturally guess a little bit. Li Ming was unwilling to reveal the source of natural energy, so it must be that this natural energy has a source, and the reserves must be considerable. Li Ming could agree so confidently, so Hornston naturally would not ask more questions. That kind of robbery was not Hornston's nature. Thinking of this, Hornston stood up. Just when he was about to say something, he hesitated for a moment, as if he suddenly remembered something, and then said, "I promised the goddess Raphaelia to go to her first. With natural energy, I can return to Laniakia, but before that, I still have to see Raphaelia." Li Ming sighed secretly and looked at Hornston with contempt. He was just racial justice and indignant, but when he thought that the beauty had returned to her original state, as Hornston said this, he looked down at Li Ming, and his expression froze. Chapter 669, Bez Planet. Oh no. When Radelia left, I forgot to ask her where she was going. What should I do? Hornston looked flustered, as if he had lost something valuable. He looked around, held his head with both hands, and paced back and forth. This made Li Ming's face darken, and he even whispered, "I didn't see him so anxious and flustered when talking about racial revival. What is the most important thing in his heart, strange guy?" Li Ming's voice was very low, but Hornston heard something vaguely. He leaned over and looked at Li Ming with wide eyes, saying, "What did you just say?" Li Ming's eyes turned slightly, and he stood up and said, "Are you going to find Redelia? I can help you." Huh? Hornston was shocked. Li Ming smiled lightly and said, "Come with me." As soon as he finished speaking, Li Ming moved and flew away. Hornston didn't understand what Li Ming meant, but he also moved and followed. After flying for a while, Li Ming and Hornston returned to the previous rocky area. In this area, the rocks were portals. Walking on the road in the middle, Li Ming said, "After the Larazel base disappeared, Raphaelia brought us here, and then left in a hurry after Raphaelia returned to the spaceship. Obviously, Raphaelia must have got some news here, so we are looking for that news." After hearing what Li Ming said, Hornston nodded repeatedly, but soon said in confusion, "Then, what should we do first?" Li Ming smiled slightly, walked straight forward, and said, "Here, there is only one place to get information. Just follow me." The reason why Li Ming was so sure was because Li Ming had already obtained this key information from Adorno's consciousness. This Lasserlu planet is a relatively hidden planet in the public universe. The probability of locking onto this planet alone among the billions of planets in the void is almost zero. It is impossible for outsiders to find it. However, any alien who finds this place must be from the public universe under the jurisdiction of the Zupping organization, and they are also very familiar with this planet. It is natural and not difficult for Li Ming to obtain the information he wants from the consciousness of the aliens here. Continue to walk deeper until you stop in front of a huge rock. This rock is tens of meters long and wide, and extremely tall. Standing in front of the rock, Li Ming paused for a moment, then raised his hand, and tapped the rock lightly. I saw a blue light flashing, and a portal has emerged. Li Ming walked in with a calm face, and Hornston followed closely. However, at this moment, in the distant Peacock Indian supercluster, in the Ebern Galaxy cluster on the edge, a galaxy war is breaking out. The Ebern Galaxy Cluster is one of the 4 major galaxy clusters in the Peacock Indian supercluster, and this war is centered around Bet's star. A large number of spaceships shuttled back and forth between galaxies. It was easy to destroy a planet without a planetary defense system. In the world of secondary civilization, wars were often more destructive. However, no matter how fierce the war was, Bet's was outside the attack system, as if this planet was the most important point of contention. Bet's, a seemingly desolate planet, was not inside the Ebern Galaxy cluster, but on the edge of the galaxy cluster. It was a wandering planet that flew from the void to the Ebern Galaxy cluster. In a giant space station at the edge of the galaxy cluster, a large number of spaceships were gathering. The spaceships here were mainly divided into 3 categories. One was a round spaceship from the Pumi civilization, and the other was a black square spaceship from the Dulang civilization. The last one was a W-type spaceship, which was the second-level civilization world of the Peacock Indian supercluster, the Bada civilization. The appearance of the giant space station was not fixed, as if it was a twisted machine part, but every place showed a sense of haste, and a large number of spaceships also rose and fell from time to time. In the interior of the space, in a separate cabin, 3 aliens were communicating with each other. In front of a triangular table, there was a person sitting on each of the 3 sides. They were General Bay from the Bad civilization, General Solis from the Pumi civilization, and General Yahan from the Dulang civilization. In the middle of the triangular tabletop was a blue light pattern, and the pattern was exactly the Bet star. Bay looked like an old man, but unlike humans, the top of his head was covered with wrinkled skin, and under his long head was a pile of beards. He was wearing a grey robe, and had 4 grey cloth bags hanging around his waist. Looking at the pattern in front of him, Ye said, "I need to reiterate the resources on Bez. One is the U energy, underground mine, and the other is the Rang energy, underground mine. If we take this planet, the resources on it can be divided equally among the 3 of us. But I'll say some things directly. Bez comes from the void area. It was originally controlled by the public universe world under the Zupping organization. However, this planet is affected by the giant attractor and is approaching the Ebern Galaxy cluster of our Peacock Indian supercluster. So the banner of this war is to quell the rebellion from the Zupping organization." Ye continued. Yahan was calm and listened quietly, but Solis turned his eyes and showed a strange smile at the corner of his mouth. He said, I said that things would not be as simple as you said. It is indeed not just about quelling the rebellion. This is also good. The zapping organization has been a bit arrogant recently. It is okay to hit their arrogance. As for the distribution of energy resources, I have no opinion. At the end, his eyes turned to Yahan. Yahan nodded slightly and said, we came here to quell the rebellion, so I was asked to meet with the two generals. You two can decide everything here. Ye was satisfied with what he said, and then he said, let me tell you about the details of the plan. Wait. Before Ye finished speaking, Solace suddenly raised his hand to stop him and said, before talking about the details, there is one more thing I want to tell you in advance. As soon as this sentence came out, Ye and Yahan paused. From Solace's tone, they could hear that Solace might be talking about something very important, which made the two of them look solemn. Solace rolled his eyes, looked at the other two, and then said solemnly, no matter what the purpose of this war is, if you find information about this person, you must inform our Pumi civilization in time. While speaking, Solace raised his hand and lightly tapped the blue light in front of him, and saw the light change and form a human figure under the reweaving. This person looked like a human, with grey hair, a black bandage covering one eye, half of his clothes were armor and half were naked, and there was a big knife hanging on his back. As soon as this figure appeared, Solace said, this person's name is Baldiston, and he is an important fugitive of our Pumi people. According to the information we have, this person is very likely to have come to this area, and very likely on the planet Bits. In order to capture this person, Commander Solomon will personally lead the other two generals here, so you two must pay attention. Solace continued. But after these words came out, Ahan and Yazuru were shocked and puzzled. Ahan just frowned and didn't say much, but his eyes kept looking at Yazuru. After thinking for a while, Yazuru said, you mean, Solomon will lead two generals here in person? Solace nodded slightly. At this time, Ye frowned in astonishment, looking at Yahan for a while, then at Solace, and said, Solace, the strongest fighting force of you Pumi people is Commander Solomon and 4 generals. If Solomon brings 2 generals here, will only 1 general be left to guard the purpose planet? Aren't you worried about the invasion of dark technology civilization? Solace raised the corners of his mouth slightly, looking nonchalant, and said, the headquarters has its own arrangements on this point, so you don't have to worry about it. Chapter 670 Special Energy. In a distant void area of the universe, a capsule spaceship was flying rapidly. In the main cabin inside the spaceship, Li Ming was sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed and silent, while Hornston was looking at the operating console with a confused look on his face. His eyes occasionally looked at Li Ming, and he whispered, Days? Li Ming slowly opened his eyes and said, the zapping organization is about to go to war with the 3 second-level civilized worlds, so the Larazel base has been temporarily moved to a more secret and safe place. Rathalia has now gone to the center of the battlefield. Bees. Hornston's brows tightened, and he came to Li Ming's side, leaned over and sat down, and said, although the zapping organization controls a huge public universe world, it is not enough to fight against a second-level civilized world, let alone 3. Li Ming nodded and continued, Base was originally a planet controlled by the zapping organization, but because of the gravitational pull of the Aburn galaxy cluster, it flew out of the empty area, and attracted the attention of the bad people. I think there must be some important resources on this Bees. Listening to Li Ming's words, Hornston also nodded repeatedly, but still replied in confusion. As for the public universe world under the zapping organization, its strength is absolutely impossible to compete with the second-level civilized world. It feels like something weird. Li Ming also continued, it's a bit strange. When we get to Bits, we should understand everything. As he said this, Li Ming's eyes slowly closed. Li Ming obtained information about the whereabouts of Ratilia from Laselu, but he had no way of knowing the details. However, these were naturally not important to Li Ming. At present, Li Ming had just completed the advancement, so he naturally had to consolidate his abilities at this time. There was no progress in the 6th domain enhanced star class, but the Phantom Dragon under the Wisdom Eye ability was strengthened a lot. Under the Phantom Dragon, Li Ming could create illusions to attack the opponent's consciousness. The various abilities that Li Ming cultivated in the inherited star class at the beginning have also been greatly improved, and the ability has taken shape. The most important thing is that the ability that Li Ming has always been unable to understand is gradually becoming clear at this moment, that is, the Witch Shadow Invisible. The 6 abilities of the inherited star class: Elemental Clone, Light, Instant Light Slash, Magic Shadow Incarnation, Elemental Summoning, and Witch Shadow Invisible have now been fully mastered by Li Ming, and with the simultaneous mastery of these abilities, Li Ming's cognition of intelligent civilization has also been greatly improved. These abilities all come from the Wisdom Civilization, and have gradually developed into various tribal branches of the Wisdom Civilization. The main reason is that no one can master all these abilities at the same time, and the inherited star cannot be read without the support of strong spiritual power. Before Wukong, Li Ming had been relying on the wisdom eye to cultivate these abilities. After possessing Wukong, these abilities gradually increased with Li Ming's advancement, and even the growth ability of the first level civilization would change dramatically. This is mainly due to Wukong's ability. Wukong is a spiritual power created to echo the Wisdom Civilization. This is different from spiritual civilization. With Wukong, the ability to cultivate Wisdom Civilization can have a deeper potential to be discovered. Li Ming, who has advanced from the 2nd level civilization to the 2.6 level civilization, needs a longer time to digest the abilities, and Wisdom Civilization will inevitably be the dominant ability of Li Ming in future battles. In addition to the cultivation of abilities, there is another point, that is the product of technological civilization on Li Ming. Li Ming originally obtained 4 robots from the hands of the Dark Technological Civilization, but one was destroyed by the Blood Hunter in the battle, so there were only 3 left. Among these 3, there is a powerful robot, the Suri. It is also a 3rd order robot. Li Ming is not very clear about the strength classification of robots in the Dark Technology Civilization, but this Soru is obviously extraordinary. In addition, the magic weapon Kanji that Li Ming obtained has now entered the stage of Cheyenne, just to achieve the point of combining with the flesh. Just like Nito, these all require a long period of concentrated practice. In his spare time, Li Ming naturally has to complete them one by one to reach the most saturated and strongest state. Li Ming began to practice without distractions, and Hornston on the side also closed his eyes to rest, occasionally taking out a communication device to communicate with other people online without disturbing Li Ming at all. In this way, the two of them have been in the spacecraft without interfering with each other. I don't know how long it has been, and there is a beep sound on the operating table of the spacecraft, and the red light spot keeps flashing. At this sound, Li Ming suddenly opened his eyes, stood up and looked back. At this time, Hornston was already in front of the operating table, staring at the blue light map on it. Li Ming walked forward quickly, and after a brief inspection, his brows frowned slightly. There were a lot of red and blue light spots flashing on the light map. The red light spots were the signals of the enemy spacecraft, and the blue light spots were the icons of the spacecraft of the public universe world. The space map used by Li Ming came from the public universe world, and he could clearly identify his own spacecraft, and the remaining unidentified spacecraft were naturally the enemies. This airspace has been blocked, and there are some spacecraft from the 2nd level civilization world at a certain distance, and this is still a distance away from Bet's star. Looking at the pattern on the operating table, Li Ming frowned slightly and whispered, "It seems that all the paths to Bet's star have been blocked." Hornston looked at it and nodded slightly. But despite this, there are still a group of blue light spacecraft approaching this area, as if they are going to break through by force. But when he saw the blockade density of the red light spots, Li Ming immediately shook his head slightly and said, "Under this attack density, it may not be so easy to break through." As he spoke, Li Ming turned his head to look at Hornston. Seeing this from Li Ming, Hornston was startled. After hesitating for a moment, he seemed to understand what Li Ming meant, and then he said, "I have contacted Balderston and Sexton before. The two are already on Bits. Regardless of whether Goddess Lathalia is on Bits, I must enter Bits to meet them." Li Ming's expression tightened, and his eyes returned to the operating table. He was worried, and did not respond to Hornston immediately. Judging from the radar graphics on the operating table, if his capsule spacecraft were to force its way in, it would probably not last for a second before being destroyed. The high energy laser of a powerful second level civilization spacecraft has great destructive power. Moreover, it was Hornston and his notification that were going to return to Laniakia. Li Ming had no need to take risks at all. He just had to hand over the natural energy Cheyenne water to the other party. After all, Li Ming had to avoid such risky things if he could. But just as Li Ming was thinking and hesitating, Hornston suddenly raised his head slightly. After thinking for a while, he whispered, "There are energy mines and wrong energy mines on Bits. This is why Balderston and Sexton came to Bits. Although these special energies are not as good as natural energy, they are at least better than ordinary energy." Li Ming's eyebrows opened up when he heard this, and he snorted and said, "Then I'm afraid this is also the reason why the second level civilization world and the public world went to war." As he said this, a flash of thought suddenly flashed through Li Ming's mind, and his eyes turned back to Hornston. His expression suddenly tightened, and his eyes widened a little, as if he suddenly remembered something, and whispered, "You energy. Wrong energy." The voice was very low, but it reminded Li Ming of the information about these two energies. There is no need to say more about energy. Li Ming used energy to refine Loangdon before, which made his body stronger. Wrong energy is also relatively rare. Even Li Ming has only heard of it, but has never really seen it. Wrong energy belongs to neutral energy, and is also a kind of special energy. This energy has a wide range of uses. It can be used for weapons, life, elixirs, etc. Its most important ability is the fusion of various energies. Simply put, many special energies have their own functions and cannot be mixed. After mixing, the energies will interact with each other, cancel each other out, and disappear. But the fusion energy can fuse any two or more energies and form a new energy body. This makes Li Ming very interested. Whether it is energy or fusion energy, it is very useful to Li Ming. To be precise, it is very useful to all alien civilizations. Chapter 671, Cannon Fodder Fleet. It is no wonder that something that even Li Ming is excited about would cause such a large-scale war. Thinking of this, Li Ming's initial idea of not wanting to land on B-Star was gone. Now Li Ming really wants to go to B-Star to take a look. Thinking of this, Li Ming turned his eyes and looked at Hornston on the side. His expression was still stern. He pretended to be thoughtful and said, "Since your two companions are on B-Star, I must go with you." Hearing that Li Ming was going to B-Star with him, Hornston was immediately stunned. His eyes flickered, and his face was full of gratitude. After all, the danger of this trip was obvious. He opened his mouth slightly and suddenly said loudly, "That's great." Li Ming echoed with a faint smile, ignoring the other party, and his eyes returned to the operating table. Checking the changes on the operating table, Li Ming has begun to think. If you want to enter B-Star, you must break through the enemy's blockade. As for the second uncle breaking through the blockade, Li Ming needs to think of some ways. With his eyes fixed, the fleet of spaceships in the distant Gangai world came into Li Ming's sight, and looked at the huge fleet. Li Ming took a deep breath, and something came to his mind. He pointed at the console, and clicked it lightly. The spaceship turned, and headed straight for the fleet. Seeing this, Hornston's eyebrows tightened, and he looked at Li Ming from the side and asked, "What are you doing?" Li Ming said, "It is obvious that the fleet of the Gangai world is flying in such a concentrated manner. They must be concentrating on a breakthrough. We might as well try to join them. This way there is a little chance. Otherwise, we can't get in." Hornston nodded slightly and understood Li Ming's intention. While talking, Li Ming's spaceship had already quickly approached the fleet in the distance. Such a rude approach also attracted the attention of the fleet. Then a message came from the console. Li Ming clicked on the message and responded immediately. In a circular ship in the middle of the fleet, two aliens were concentrating on the message replied by Li Ming on the console. A relatively short alien said first, "It looks like it is also a combat spaceship that came from our public universe because of its reputation." Another slightly taller alien nodded slightly, and after thinking for a while, he replied, "The fleet is full, let him go back." As he spoke, the taller alien stretched out his hand to reject Li Ming, but before he stretched out his hand, the shorter alien immediately said, "Wait." The taller one paused, looked at the shorter one beside him, and showed hesitation. The shorter one then said, "Since he is actively participating, how can we reject him directly? Then leave a place for him to be included. After all, one more person means one more opportunity." The taller one paused after hearing this, and immediately understood it after a little thought. After a smile, he replied, "That's right, that's right." After that, the taller one raised his hand and confirmed the information that Li Ming participated. Li Ming also received the other party's message immediately. When he saw that the other party agreed, Li Ming immediately showed a satisfied smile. The fleet has a fixed organization, which requires each member to be managed uniformly. After Li Ming was allowed to join the fleet, a system connection was issued. Li Ming didn't care and raised his hand to agree directly. Since he could join the formation, Li Ming's goal was achieved, and he didn't need to care about other things. A slight smile appeared on his face, and he whispered, "Now that we have successfully entered the fleet organization of the public universe world, whether we can break through or not, we can only." As he was talking, Li Ming suddenly paused, frowned tightly, and looked back at the operating table. "This is..." Li Ming was shocked by the changing information on the operating table, and his eyes widened a little. Even Hornston on the side had strange eyes. He whispered, "This system is..." At this time, on the operating table, blue light woven and flashed, and a new pattern had emerged. This pattern was formed by the connection system, and was also the formation of the current fleet. The entire fleet, including Li Ming's spaceship, has a total of 16 ships, of different sizes, and the formation of the spaceships revolves around the central spaceship. The circular spaceship is located in the center of the fleet, and the other spaceships are also distributed in all directions of the spaceship, completely surrounding it, and the circular spaceship in the middle can completely control the fleet member spaceships around it. The ultimate goal of this formation is to protect the main ship in the middle to break through. When the fleet suddenly encounters the enemy's defense, it will inevitably be attacked. At this time, the other spaceships of the fleet will defend under the control of the main ship, which is the so-called cannon fodder, thereby protecting the main ship to successfully break through. Seeing this scene, Li Ming's teeth in his mouth could not help but bite tightly, with a look of anger on his face, whispering, "Damn it, no wonder I was allowed to join the fleet, but I was allowed to be cannon fodder." As Li Ming guessed, the current fleet formation is just like this. For this fleet, it is naturally good to have one more cannon fodder, but for Li Ming, it is more tragic. Hornston naturally understood this truth. His eyes widened a little and he stammered, "This is clearly to use us as cannon fodder." Li Ming stared at the control panel, as if he hadn't heard it. After a while of thinking, he snorted and said, "Cannon fodder, the more the better. This is indeed an opportunity." As he said this, Li Ming slowly raised his right hand, and a green light flashed in his palm, and a green dragon formed immediately. The spacecraft itself has an energy shield, which is used to defend against the attack of high-energy lasers, but different spacecraft have different energy systems and reserves, which is the difference between the defense of energy shields. Capsule spacecraft like Li Ming can only defend against a high-energy laser. This is incomparable to the spacecraft in the surrounding fleet. The entire fleet approached little by little. At this time, the area chosen by the fleet was a gap in the defense point. Through the control panel, it can be clearly seen that as the fleet approached, the enemy's spacecraft exposed their cannons one by one. At this time, on the main ship of the fleet, the two aliens in front of the control panel in the main cabin tensed their nerves. The tall man looked at the console and said, "The camp defense system is activated. Speed up." The short man immediately raised his hand and said, "Yes." At this moment, the entire fleet suddenly increased its speed and flew straight to the distance. The speed was also increased to the limit. The flight speed of the fleet depends on the average flight speed of the fleet's spacecraft. However, the spacecraft here are all of the technology of the second-level civilization, so there is no big surprise in the speed. As the fleet flew quickly, light suddenly flashed on both sides in the distance, and red lasers shot out. At this time, Li Ming's capsule spacecraft suddenly turned and flew to the center of the fleet, while the main ship of the fleet turned to the side and came to the side of the capsule spacecraft. It was as if Li Ming's capsule spacecraft was the main ship, and the previous main ship became a member of the fleet. This startled the two aliens in the circular spacecraft. The tall man widened his eyes and stammered, "What's going on?" The short man was also panicked, and kept raising his hand to control the console, but at this moment the console was no longer under the control of external forces, and the entire system was completely in autonomous and independent operation. The two looked flustered, and began to perform various emergency operations. However, no matter how they struggled, the system at this time seemed to have independent consciousness, and began to operate on its own. The red lasers from all around arrived, and the beams rushed over like raindrops, while the ships of the fleets around them kept flying and moving to resist. At this moment, the circular ship was still in the middle of the fleet, but there was an additional capsule ship in the middle area. Li Ming looked at the operating table with full concentration, because the fleet system was now completely under Li Ming's control, and all the fleet members, including the circular ship, had become Li Ming's cannon fodder. The reason why the circular ship was still in the middle of the fleet was because they were in this formation before Li Ming joined the fleet. Although Li Ming now controlled the entire fleet, it would be better to defend according to the original fleet formation. Chapter 672 Breaking into the blockade. If the fleet defense system is not destroyed, Li Ming can also pass through with this circular spaceship, but if an accident occurs, and the fleet formation is destroyed, then this circular spaceship will inevitably become cannon fodder and a substitute. In short, the entire fleet will be under the control of Li Ming, and will do its best to protect the capsule spaceship from passing through, but Li Ming does not rule out the possibility of more spaceships passing through together. Red lasers are constantly shooting, and the spaceships at the edge of the formation are like a wall that resists a large number of attacks. At this time, the energy shield of the spaceship also plays a great role. A large number of lasers are blocked by the surrounding spaceships. These spaceships are like a barrier that completely blocks the laser rain. The light spots spread on the surface of the spaceship, just like raindrops hitting the water. All of this is clearly displayed on the system's operating console, but it only lasts for 1 or 2 seconds. The non-beam black object has arrived. This black object is hidden in the laser rain and shoots onto the spaceship with the laser rain. The black object is very small, only the size of a fist, and is not affected by the spaceship shield, and is directly embedded in the surface of the spaceship, like a nail. And a few seconds later, boom, boom. A violent explosion suddenly sounded, and the spaceships exploded one after another. Li Ming was relatively calm at first. After all, it only took more than 10 seconds to pass through the blockade area, but the sudden rumble startled Li Ming, and widened his eyes. Some spaceships on the formation diagram on the console began to disappear, and they were destroyed. Li Ming frowned, not knowing why. After the bombing, the fleet of more than a dozen spaceships was reduced to a few in a moment, which made Li Ming nervous. He did not dare to take any chances. He narrowed his eyes slightly and manipulated the circular spaceship to fill the gap in defense. The huge circular spaceship blocked the side of the capsule spaceship like a wall, and the laser rain also hit it quickly. Li Ming could clearly see the energy reserve of the circular spaceship shield through the formation system. The golden laser was like rain, but the energy reserve of the circular spaceship was rich, and it would not be destroyed for a while. But Li Ming did not know that there were black objects mixed in the laser rain. These black objects hit the circular spaceship with laser rain. The laser rain was blocked by the shield, but the black objects were embedded into the metal surface of the spaceship like nails. Although Li Ming sensed the attack density of the laser and the energy reserve of the circular spaceship's shield from the system, he could not see the black objects at all. In the giant spaceship that launched the attack from a distance, 2 puny people were looking at the operating table. One of them said, "The Black Spider broke through the energy shield and destroyed 80% of the fleet's spaceships, and the main ship has been hit by the Black Spider." Another alien smiled with satisfaction and said, "In the final analysis, the void energy of the public universe world is scarce, and it is just a group of rabble." As he said this, the laser attack did not stop, and at this time the fleet was already covered by the flames of the explosion. The black objects like nails on the surface of the circular spaceship glowed slightly, and then exploded directly like a landmine. The violent explosion and flames enveloped this airspace, and the flames and debris continued to burst and spread. The fleet turned into a sea of fire, and no shadow of any spaceship could be seen. But at this moment, in the thick flames, a spaceship broke through the air and flew straight into the distance. The puny people who were in the attack state were shocked. There are still spaceships? It's about to fly out of the attack range. The puny people said in surprise. Another puny frowned, his eyes flashed with cold light, raised his hand, and pointed at the operating table, and said sternly, "No spaceship is allowed to pass through our blockade area." With this point, the bottom of the huge spaceship suddenly flashed with light, and a black object shot out from it. This object, like the object just now, went straight to the spaceship that burst out of the explosion flame. And the capsule spaceship that flew out of the fleet's explosion flame was Li Ming. Li Ming in the main cabin of the spaceship breathed a sigh of relief, looked at the operating table with his eyes, and whispered, "Fortunately, it passed the blockade smoothly. Lost a fleet, but Li Ming also passed smoothly. For Li Ming, this is naturally the best result." Looking at the operating table, blue light flashed on the operating table at this time. The previous camp system has disappeared, replaced by a planet, which is Bits. After breaking through the blockade, they immediately approached Bits, which was Li Ming's final destination. The current situation on Bits was not clear, and Li Ming still had to check carefully before deciding on the landing point. But just as Li Ming's operating system was about to check Bits, a muffled bang sounded. The entire spacecraft trembled slightly, as if the spacecraft was hit by a heavy object. The main cabin also shook violently, and Li Ming's expression became tense. Hornston turned his eyes and looked at Li Ming, saying, "What's going on?" Li Ming naturally didn't know what happened. He raised his hand and switched the Bits information on the console to the spacecraft information. The blue light then wove a graphic of the spacecraft that Li Ming was driving. Just a rough look, a red dot caught Li Ming's attention. Looking intently, Li Ming's face looked a little ugly, and he whispered, "This is..." The red dot was the Black Spider's high-energy bomb, which was now wedged tightly into the spacecraft like a nail. There was nothing unusual on the console, as if the spaceship had been hit by an object and stuck to the surface of the spaceship. However, after Li Ming used his consciousness to sense it, he opened his eyes and cried out, "Not good." As soon as the two words came out, boom. The black object exploded directly, and in an instant, the entire spaceship collapsed and shattered, and the flames spread out. In the flames, two balls of golden light shot out. They were Li Ming and Hornston. At this moment, their bodies were completely wrapped in golden light energy. This kind of explosion damage obviously would not affect their bodies, but the two flew away under the shock wave of the explosion, like sand blown away by the wind. Under the shockwave, the two were flying to Bets Star, but now they were unable to control their bodies, and could only go with the flow, and move with the situation. Once they came into contact with Bets Star, under the gravity of the planet itself, the two turned into two groups of meteors, and fell from the sky. The remaining force of the shockwave was fed back, and the gravity of Bets Star had arrived, which undoubtedly accelerated the speed of the two people's fall. At this time, the two could no longer care about each other, and could only use their own energy to resist gravity. Bets is a special sphere. There are not too many deep pits on the surface, nor are there undulating mountains. It cannot be said that it is all plain land, but compared with other wandering planets, it is still quite unique. The temperature of the wandering planet is not too low due to the temperature inside the planet and the insulation of the atmosphere, and some wandering planets still have creatures. There are no creatures on this wandering planet. The temperature is mountainous. There are ice layers, there are lakes, and the terrain is flat. A huge base is located on a black rock formation. The entire base consists of 5 giant spaceships. These 5 spaceships are all silver and round, which are the spaceships of the puny people. There is one in the middle, and one in each of the 4 directions. There are also metal walls on the outermost periphery of the spaceship, which completely surround the 5 spaceships in the middle. Outside the wall, there are groups of puny soldiers patrolling everywhere. These soldiers are all second-level civilizations, and their individual combat power is also extraordinary. This is also the strength of the puny people as a second-level civilization world. Everything seemed very calm, without any abnormality, but at this moment, a golden object suddenly flashed from the sky. Boom. A loud noise was heard, and the earth trembled slightly. Smoke and gravel burst out. A patrol team of 3 people not far away was stunned, and each of them stood there in shock. After looking at each other, they all looked at the area where the object fell. After a slight hesitation, the 3 of them walked over, and the smoke and dust drifted away. There was a large pit on the ground that was dozens of meters long and wide. The 3 aliens stood in front of the pit and saw that the bottom of the pit was empty, except for a pile of rocks. There was nothing else. It was as if nothing had fallen down at all. Chapter 673 Commander-in-Chief, Solomon. Beeping sound was heard. One of the Pumi people raised his hand and looked at the device on his wrist. Then a voice came, "What's the situation over there?" The Pumi looked at the big pit in front of him and stammered, "No. It's nothing. It's just a meteorite." The device on his wrist immediately replied, "Be alert." Yes. After replying, the device shut down automatically. After the alien continued to look at the big pit, his eyes shifted to the other 2 aliens and said, "Let's go." As he spoke, the 3 aliens left the big pit. At this time, in the circular spaceship in the middle of the base, an alien was looking at the operating table. He was the only one in the entire main cabin. The portal behind him flashed a faint light, and a soldier came in. After bowing his head, he said, "Captain Kaoya, it's just a meteorite falling outside. I didn't find anything unusual." Kaoya looked back at the soldier, then his eyes returned to the operating table, nodded slightly, and replied, "I know." The soldier bowed again and turned away. Kaoya looked at the operating table in front of him, and couldn't help whispering, "Meteorite." As he was thinking, there was a faint light on the ground behind him, and a blue halo appeared on the ground. Then a figure slowly rose from the halo, just like slowly emerging from some liquid. Kaoya didn't notice it at first. He was still thinking about the meteorite just now, but after he couldn't think of any clues, he looked back at the operating table. At this time, Li Ming's whole body had already emerged. Kaoya's eyebrows suddenly tightened, his body didn't move, and his eyes had already turned back. At this time, he naturally sensed the abnormality behind him. His right hand suddenly clenched tightly, and he turned around and punched out directly. However, this reaction speed was obviously too slow. The fist stopped before it got close to Li Ming. Suddenly, his eyes blurred. Looking at Li Ming was like looking at a hazy mist. His body was also shaking and a little unstable. Finally, he fell to the ground with a thump. Li Ming looked down at Kaoya with contempt, and his right hand slowly deepened, aimed at Kaoya on the ground, and grabbed him fiercely. A shadowy green hand was released, and it immediately grabbed Kaoya's head. It pulled back hard, and a soul was extracted. The green hand held Kaoya's soul motionlessly, and Li Ming's eyes were also focused on the soul. Suddenly, the green hand flashed, and turned into a green vortex, absorbing Kaoya's soul into it. Li Ming's eyes turned and returned to Kaoya's body again. Then he raised his hand again, and a white arc flashed in his palm. Bang, a flash of lightning. Kaoya's body turned into ashes and disappeared. Li Ming also took 2 steps forward and came to the operating table. His body suddenly twisted and changed and turned into Kaoya's appearance. Although his eyes were looking at the operating table, the consciousness in his brain had already flashed pictures of various information, and a large amount of information emerged bit by bit. Kaoya led a fleet of 5 spaceships. This place was controlled by the coalition forces of the second-level civilization world. The purpose was to welcome the commander of the Pumi civilization, Solomon. Kaoya also had a copy of the battle plan for B-Star. The mission of the Pumi civilization was to assist the attack and cooperate with the Bad and Dulang people to encircle and suppress the remaining public universe world troops and senior officials on B-Star. The main leader of the Bad people was one person, the great General Ye. At this time, he was already at the base of B-Star. The main leader of the Dulang people was not a Dulang person, but a nobleman whose identity information was unknown. In this war, the Dulang people only sent one general, Yahan. A general is generally only in the second interval of the second-level civilization, and a great general is in the third interval. There is a difference. The space blockade was guided by the Dulang Yahan in space, and the Pumi people, who were assisting the attack, had sent a great general to the battlefield. That was Salis. According to the Pumi people's plan, this operation would not only have the commander Solomon appear in person, but also 3 great generals. Solis was already on the battlefield, and the other 2 great generals, Sami and Sampa, were also on the way. This distribution of combat power made Li Ming confused, frowning and puzzled. According to the war's mission deployment, the Pumi civilization is only assisting the war, but the combat force dispatched includes 3 generals and commanders, which is a bit exaggerated. Li Ming whispered to himself. Obviously, this is unreasonable. This combat force distribution has exceeded the Dulang people and bad people who are mainly responsible for the attack, and the commanders are all on the battlefield in person, which is really a bit abnormal. Unfortunately, Kaio Ya's information is limited, and Li Ming can't know why he is not there, but he always feels that this is unreasonable. The information displayed on the console at this moment is the war situation on Bezstar. The forces of the Gangai world have been surrounded, and a war is also going on at this moment. Judging from the situation, it is only a matter of time for the Gangai world to be annihilated. After all, the forces of the Gangai world are isolated and helpless at this moment, and Bezstar has been blocked. The road team outside cannot enter, and if it continues to consume like this, there will inevitably be only one way to go. Alas. Looking at it with his eyes, Li Ming couldn't help but sigh. Li Ming is very clear about the dark rule of the second level civilization world. The Gangai world is also a clear stream, but its strength is weak, and it is a pity to be annihilated. Li Ming was secretly regretting when a light suddenly flashed on the console and a message appeared. Li Ming raised his hand and the content of the message appeared in front of him. After just a glance, Li Ming opened his eyes wide and said in surprise, "It's here so soon. Commander Solomon," Li Ming said to himself, and immediately turned around and walked out. This commander is the best existence of the Pumi people. Li Ming naturally cannot underestimate him. Since he received this message, he naturally has to go out to greet him quickly. After walking out of the spaceship and coming to the open ground, many soldiers also lined up to follow. Li Ming stood still and looked up at the sky. At this moment, a silver spaceship has arrived in the space of B-Star. This spaceship is round, but not large in size. It just has undulating carvings on the surface of the spaceship, which is very different from ordinary spaceships. The spaceship did not enter B-Star immediately, but stopped in the air. In the main cabin of the spaceship, Solomon was sitting in a high position looking at the console. There was an alien operating the console. This alien was not a Pumi, but a Delani from the Dark Tech civilization. And there was another person standing in front of Solomon, and that was the Blood Hunter. The Blood Hunter looked up at Solomon and said, "Among the entire Pumi civilization's top leaders, Solis is the most sensible." Solomon looked solemn and replied, "Now Sami and Sample are also doubting me, and they temporarily rejected my order and stayed on the planet Pulpus." The Blood Hunter snorted and said, "I told you a long time ago that it would be better to hand over these 4 generals directly to our dark technology civilization for processing. Like you, they will be directly transformed. Not only will their strength be greatly increased, but they can also control the entire Hydra Centauri supercluster, so there won't be so much trouble." Solomon glanced at the Blood Hunter unhappily and said, "Things are not as simple as you think. There are a large number of secondary civilizations in the Pumi civilization. The original plan was to let you promote the war and consume each other's combat power, so that your dark technology civilization invasion will be smooth. I didn't expect that after so many years, you still haven't accomplished anything," Solomon said coldly. Hearing this, Zuhu frowned and showed an unhappy look on his face, but he turned around immediately and said, "I do have an unshakable responsibility for this, but everything will be fine." Solomon said, "I still have to say something in advance. After the dark technology civilization takes over, the races of the Pumi civilization must be given superior arrangements." Zuhu smiled and said, "As long as you don't resist, life under the dark technology civilization is the life that all living beings want." Solomon then said no more. His expression was still cold. A moment later, there was a sudden flash of light in the sky above the Bezstar base, and a spaceship suddenly appeared right above the base. This spaceship was the one driven by Solomon. Li Ming, standing below, bowed his head and saluted. I saw a blue light flashing at the bottom of the spaceship, and then a ball of light shone on the ground with a whoosh. After the blue light, 3 figures had appeared. Chapter 674, The Sudden Arrival of Hornston. The leader was Solomon, and behind him were 2 aliens completely wrapped in black cloaks. Their bodies and faces could not be seen, but their voice waves were very obvious. One was very tall, and the other was slightly tall. Li Ming bowed his head respectfully, not daring to look directly at the 3 people, but his consciousness had already scanned the 3 people. Solomon, a 2.9 level civilization, had a powerful aura that quickly covered the entire base. The 2 people behind him were one 2.6 level civilization, and one 2.5 level civilization. The 3 of them were in front, and Li Ming was behind, and they came to the spaceship in the middle of the base together. When they came to the main cabin, Solomon looked at the operating table first, glanced casually, and immediately looked at Li Ming, saying, "Kyo Yap, has the target's information appeared?" Li Ming bowed his head quickly and replied respectfully, "General Solis has not replied to the information yet, so he should not be found yet." Solomon had a cold face and showed displeasure. He looked at the operating table in a blink of an eye, and Li Ming raised his head slightly and looked at the other party. Although Solomon is a 2.9 level civilization, Li Ming can still sense the information in the other party's brain, which is also related to Li Ming's super strength advancement. Li Ming has 3 civilizations, and the advanced energy is 3 times that of aliens. One interval material can also meet Li Ming's advancement, but Li Ming's advancement this time uses 2 interval materials, and the volume of energy has increased a lot. The total volume is also 4 times that of ordinary aliens. His strength and ability have increased accordingly. The star and multi-civilization system that Li Ming cultivates are destined to make Li Ming stronger and stronger. In this way, Li Ming's pair of wise eyes can see more. Li Ming still has to check the information in Solomon's brain carefully. Even passive abilities need to be extra careful. The gap in the level of new shoes can be easily discovered by the other party. The target Solomon wants to find is Hornston and his accomplices, but Solomon does not know that Hornston and the other 3 have all arrived at Bet's star. Solomon only came for Baldeston alone. Li Ming did not check the information any further to avoid any accidents, but he found something unusual in the 2 black-cloaked men following Solomon. His eyes suddenly widened, and his expression was startled. He said in secret, "These 2 guys are..." He raised his head slightly and looked at the 2 black-cloaked men, and his face became serious. These 2 were the Blood Hunter and Delaney of the Dark Technology civilization. The commander of the Pumi civilization is actually entangled with the Dark Technology civilization. Li Ming was surprised. There is no doubt that this is a huge matter. With Li Ming's current civilization level, he can easily check the information in the brains of Blood Hunter and Delaney. At this time, Li Ming took the information of the 2 people into his brain bit by bit. A lot of information about the Dark Technology civilization poured into his brain. The amount of information was extremely huge. Li Ming still had to watch it carefully bit by bit. Fortunately, the consciousness decomposed and checked the information very quickly. In this short period of time, Li Ming took the lead in checking some important content. Solomon has accepted the transformation of the Dark Technology and now belongs to half of the Dark Technology civilization. The technology of the Dark Technology civilization has higher requirements for the energy volume in the body of civilized organisms. The most mature technology is the transformation of the 3rd level civilization. This is also because the 3rd level civilization has enough energy in its body, and it can become a powerful combat force after the transformation. The transformation of the 2nd level civilization is still in the experimental stage. It is not only immature, but also difficult to apply. The most important point is that the personnel of the Dark Technology civilization will not be able to advance again after the transformation. This is a very fatal point. Of course, the Dark Technology civilization has always believed that among the cosmic civilizations, the 3rd level civilization is the highest civilization. This statement has also been spread among many civilizations. He also said it when chatting with Hornston before. Li Ming's cognition is limited, so he is naturally skeptical about this. Solomon in front of him has only undergone a preliminary transformation, and he can continue to enter the 3rd level civilization through advancement. In the agreement between Solomon and the dark technology civilization, Solomon will undergo a deep transformation after entering the third level civilization and become a true member of the dark technology civilization. The second level civilization transformation. This immature technology was used on Solomon, so Solomon was just a test subject. It was precisely because the technology was not mature enough that the dark technology civilization, as a third level civilization, had no great interest in the second level civilization world. In the agreement between Solomon and the dark technology civilization, Solomon needed to cooperate with the Blood Hunter to rule the second level civilization world and search for the fugitives of the Kangala civilization. This was also the reason why Solomon went to Beastar. As for the plan to rule the second level civilization world, it was all ruined because of Li Ming. The Blood Hunter and Eleni were both manned civilization, one of the races of the dark technology civilization. Naturally, they would not accept transformation before reaching the third level civilization. This information seemed to be in order, but in fact it was disorganized. Li Ming needed to analyze and ponder it bit by bit. Some things were even more incomprehensible to Li Ming. After all, it involved the information of the third level civilization. While Li Ming was still sorting out this information in his consciousness, Solomon suddenly made a sound of hum. In this tense atmosphere, Li Ming did not dare to relax at all. He immediately looked up and saw Solomon staring at the operating table with his eyes focused, as if he saw something important. Li Ming did not move, but Zuhu and Eleni had already surrounded him. The three of them looked at the operating table together. Although Li Ming did not move, his consciousness also sensed the information on the operating table from a distance. In the map information on the operating table, there was an alien walking towards the location of the base on foot. After sensing it, Li Ming's eyes suddenly opened, and he said in his heart, "Hornston." The person walking towards the base was Hornston. This made Li Ming frown slightly. Solomon originally came for a guy named Boldston. Now Hornston appeared, which was like walking into a trap. Li Ming's eyes moved, and he thought quickly, but he hadn't thought of any countermeasures yet. Solomon in front of the operating table suddenly perked up and said in surprise, "Isn't this one of the three people, Hornston?" Hearing this, the Blood Hunter's face changed, and he looked at the operating table intently. With his eyes moving, his mouth slightly opened, and whispered, "He is Hornston." Solomon stood up straight, thought for a while, and said coldly, "You came just in time. If we catch this person, we will find two of the three." As he said this, he swung his right hand, shook the cloak behind him, and turned to walk out. The Blood Hunter and Eleni looked at each other, hesitated for a while, and then walked out quickly. Li Ming still did not move. After the three people left, Li Ming fell into deep thought, but he only hesitated for a moment, and then walked out. Blood Hunter and Eleni did not know the information about the three escaped members of the Kangala civilization, so they did not recognize Hornston's identity. However, it was not surprising that the two did not know. It was obvious that the high-level officials of the manned civilization did not want the two to die, and the probability of handing the information to Solomon, a 2.9 civilization, would be higher. Far away from the periphery of the base, Hornston was walking on the rocky ground with his eyes constantly looking at the spaceships above the base. It was because of the spaceships here that Hornston was attracted to fly over, and as he got closer, this huge base attracted Hornston's attention even more. A gust of wind and sand passed in front of him, making a whoosh sound. Hornston paused and stopped in place, with his head slightly raised. Looking at the sky, a white figure appeared above his head at some point. The person coming was Solomon. He looked Hornston up and down, hesitated for a moment, smiled slightly, and whispered, "All the details are the same as described." The voice was not loud, but Hornston heard it very clearly, but he did not understand what the other party meant, so his brows tightened, and his face showed confusion. Solomon stared at Hornston and said, "Hornston?" Hornston became even more puzzled, but he already had a bad premonition, so he did not respond to the other party, but just looked at him coldly. Chapter 675. Opening the seal. "It seems it's right," Solomon said coldly. While he was speaking, his fists were clenched tightly. His eyes were quietly looking at Hornston, and Hornston was just looking back at him. The breeze kept blowing, and the two seemed to be just looking at each other. At this time, Li Ming was already standing on the top of the spaceship at the edge of the base. From this angle, he could completely take in the environment in front of him. In the distance, Solomon's white figure was floating in the air more than 10 meters above the ground, and Hornston on the ground looked up. On the surface, the two seemed to be just looking at each other, but through his wisdom eyes, Li Ming could already see the powerful energy released by the two. His eyes turned slightly, and outside the base wall was the figure of Delaney. As for the Blood Hunter, he had disappeared. Li Ming kept looking around, looking for the location of the Blood Hunter, and thought to himself, could it be that the guy who can only shoot secretly? Li Ming frowned slightly, but he didn't dare to search for the whereabouts of the Blood Hunter in a big way. Li Ming knew that the Blood Hunter had a divine weapon in his hand. As for what divine weapon, Li Ming was not sure, but what was certain was that this guy could give his opponent a fatal blow in secret with his special stealth ability. Hornston's arm was also shot off by this weapon. Just as Li Ming was looking around, boom. A loud noise was heard, and the dust in the distance suddenly wrinkled, as if a bomb exploded, and huge rocks were ejected from the dust. Li Ming narrowed his eyes slightly and looked over. I saw Solomon in the sky, had already punched down heavily, and this punch hit the position where Hornston had stood before, but after the dust, there was nothing under the fist, only a ruin. Hornston's figure had just jumped away, and his eyes looked at the ruins and Solomon's white figure below. His face changed slightly, and he thought to himself, this speed. Thinking in his heart, there was a sudden whoosh below, and Solomon's figure disappeared in place like a phantom. Hornston opened his eyes wide immediately, but it was too late. A shadow flashed on the right side of his body, and Solomon had already appeared. Although Solomon's body was on the right, his right leg had already reached Hornston's abdomen, and he kicked him. Bang! He felt a sharp pain in his abdomen, as if something had hit his abdomen quickly, and it felt like his entire abdomen had been separated from his body. He opened his mouth and a mouthful of blood spurted out, and his expression tightened. But before he could feel the pain, Hornston's body flew straight into the sky under the impact of this force. His body was still rising under the impact, and in the higher air, Solomon's figure had already emerged, his right hand clenched into a fist, and white ripples appeared around his fist. The ripples were light white, like transparent, and they kept rotating around the fist, forming a vortex right in front of the fist. Wingate fist. Solomon's cold voice came out of his mouth. When Hornston heard these words, the strong pressure had already appeared on his back. Before Hornston could do anything, the fist hit the cross on his back heavily. Bang! The ripples on the surface of the fist spread out in a ring shape on the surface of the cross. After the ripples spread, Hornston fell to the ground like a bullet. Boom! The earth trembled slightly. With this huge sound, the crust was lifted from the surface like a tile. The ground within a range of several kilometers was completely shattered. The entire hard rock ground was completely shattered. In addition to the shattered crust, the cracks also expanded very quickly, and there was a lot of smoke and dust in the area. The cracks had even spread to the metal wall at the edge of the base, causing the metal wall to tremble. Li Ming's face darkened slightly, and his eyes were fixed on Solomon in the distance. He couldn't help thinking in his heart, as expected of a 2.9 level civilization, the power of this attack is unexpectedly. There was a little astonishment in his eyes. Such a fast and powerful attack really made Li Ming far behind. The only one who could use such a powerful attack was naturally a power civilization. However, in a dark corner, on top of a rock, the Blood Hunter was holding a sniper rifle in a transparent posture, and looking at the distance. He also saw the heavy blow just now. It seems that I don't need to take action at all. The Blood Hunter slowly put down the gun and whispered, and at the same time his body gradually changed from transparent to real. At this time, the smoke and dust in the distance had all dissipated, and the ground was a ruin, as if the earth had been turned over by a tiller. Solomon in the air just looked down, and said to himself, let's start quickly, Hornston, I have all your information. Hornston in the ruins below was already covered with scars, and his whole body was lying on the ground motionless. After a few seconds, his head slowly raised, and 2 bloodstains flowed on both sides of his forehead. The bloodstains at the corners of his mouth were still clearly visible. It's a last resort, partners. Anyway, someone has to go back. As he spoke, His right hand curled up and moved to the chest under his body, and the middle finger was put together. He pressed hard on the left chest. Level 3 seal. Open. After whispering, there was a flash of light on the back of his left chest, and a beam of light shot out from the left side of his back. The beam of light rushed straight into the sky with powerful energy. Even if you were standing far away, you could feel the powerful energy. This energy aura was not an ordinary energy field, but a civilization level aura, as if someone had suddenly advanced to the first level of civilization. The aura had not yet subsided, and with a whoosh, a beam of light shot out from the same position on the left side of the back. Although it was the same position, the directions of the beams were different. The first one was vertical, but the second one was sideways. Li Ming had sensed the strong energy aura from a distance. Anyone who had experienced the advancement of the second level civilization knew this familiar aura. It was as if someone was advancing there. Before Li Ming could react, a whoosh, a third beam of light appeared. 3 beams of light shot out from the same position on the back, but in different directions, just like 3 light blades shot down from the sky and inserted into Hornston's back. At this time, Hornston's body was shining with golden light, and the energy aura changed in both quality and quantity. He stood up slowly and mysteriously, and the beam of light behind him changed its angle as his body moved backward. However, the beam of light was shortening little by little, as if it was being absorbed into the body little by little. Sensing Hornston's energy at this time, it was already a 2.9 level civilization. Li Ming had learned from his previous communication with him that Hornston was a 3rd level civilization in the Kangala civilization, but the energy in his body was sealed, and the light column just now opened part of the seal, making Hornston, a 2.6 level civilization, become a 2.9 level civilization. The light column behind him was only a dozen meters long at this moment, but the speed of shortening slowed down. The whole person was like 3 thorns stuck in his back. He raised his head and looked at Solomon in the sky and said coldly, "This is what you want, right?" Solomon also showed a satisfied expression, snorted Dr. Dog, and replied, "It's better than I expected." Li Ming had clearly sensed the changes in the distance, which was why Li Ming was not worried about Hornston, but Delaney outside the metal wall showed a strange expression, obviously worried about the more unexpected situation in the battle. Li Ming could clearly sense this change in the other party's heart. While worrying, Delaney turned her head slightly to look in another direction, but after just a glance, she turned her head back. Li Ming subconsciously looked in the direction where the other party turned his head. On a huge rock in the distance, the figure of the Blood Hunter had entered Li Ming's field of vision. At this time, the Blood Hunter also showed a look of surprise and slowly raised the sniper rifle in his hand again and whispered, "It seems it's not so easy to deal with the opponent." While raising the sniper rifle again, the figure of the Blood Hunter also disappeared on the spot as it became transparent little by little. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.